Picture yourself standing in an empty theatre at 3 in the morning. The stage lights are off, the audience has gone home, and you are completely alone with the realization that there is no script for your life. No director will tell you what to say, no playwright has written your lines, and no audience expects a particular performance. You must create every scene, every dialogue, every meaningful moment from nothing but your own choices. This is not a metaphor for creativity or self-expression. This is the fundamental human condition according to existentialism, the most influential philosophical movement to emerge from the wreckage of 2 world wars and the collapse of traditional certainties. Existentialism arose when humanity faced an unprecedented crisis of meaning. Scientific advances had seemingly reduced human beings to mere biological machines. Religious authority had lost its grip on educated minds. Political systems had revealed their capacity for unprecedented horror. In this void, existentialist thinkers ask the most basic question possible. If nothing else can tell us who we are or how we should live, what does it mean to be human? Their answer revolutionized philosophy, psychology, literature, and our understanding of personal responsibility. This philosophy does not offer comfort or easy answers. Instead, it presents a stark vision of human existence that is simultaneously terrifying and liberating. It demands that you confront the weight of absolute freedom, the anxiety of meaninglessness, and the full responsibility for every choice you make. Yet within this apparent bleakness lies a profound dignity, the recognition that human consciousness possesses the remarkable power to create meaning, value, and identity from nothing but its own authentic choices. Existentialism is not pessimistic, but brutally honest about what it means to be fully human in a universe that offers no predetermined answers. The philosophy emerged from concrete historical trauma, but speaks to universal human experiences. Every person who has ever felt the crushing weight of having to choose their life path, questioned whether their existence matters, or struggled with the gap between who they are and who they pretend to be, has touched the edge of existential insight. This is philosophy born not from abstract speculation, but from the lived experience of confronting life's most fundamental questions without the comfort of absolute answers. Part 1. The revolutionary insight of existence before essence. The cornerstone of existentialism rests on a deceptively simple reversal of traditional thinking. For thousands of years, philosophers and theologians argued that humans possess a predetermined essence or nature that defines what we are before we ever make our first choice. Existentialists shattered this assumption with their radical claim that existence precedes essence, meaning we exist first and only then create what we are through our choices and actions. To understand this revolution, consider how we typically think about objects in the world. A hammer exists because someone first conceived its essence, its purpose as a tool for driving nails. The idea of the hammer, its essential function, existed in the mind of its creator before any particular hammer came into physical existence. Traditional philosophy applied this same logic to human beings. Whether through divine creation, natural law, or biological programming, humans supposedly possessed an essential nature that determined their proper function, goals, and meaning before they were born. Existentialists rejected this framework entirely. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that human consciousness is fundamentally different from all other phenomena in the universe because it exists without any predetermined purpose or nature. You were not designed by God for a specific purpose, you were not programmed by evolution to fulfill particular functions, and you were not destined by fate to follow a predetermined path. Instead, you simply appeared in existence, a conscious being, thrown into a world that offers no instruction manual for what you should become. This insight has profound implications that extend far beyond academic philosophy. Consider the question of human nature itself. Traditional thinking suggests that somewhere beneath our cultural conditioning and personal experiences lies our true, essential self, waiting to be discovered. Existentialism argues there is no such hidden essence to uncover. Your nature is not something you discover, but something you actively create through every choice you make, every value you embrace, and every action you take. Think about identity formation in concrete terms. A teenager struggling with questions about career, relationships, and personal values is not trying to uncover their pre-existing true self. They are literally creating their identity through each decision they make. When they choose to volunteer at an animal shelter, they are not expressing some innate compassion that was always there. They are creating compassion within themselves through the act of choosing compassionate behavior. The self emerges from action, not the reverse. This applies equally to larger questions about human purpose and meaning. Religious traditions often claim that humans exist to worship God, serve others, or achieve salvation. Secular philosophies might argue that we exist to pursue happiness, knowledge, or social progress. Existentialists contend that humans exist for no predetermined reason at all. We simply find ourselves existing, conscious and free, with the capacity to create our own purposes through our choices and commitments. The psychological impact of this insight cannot be overstated. If you truly accept that existence precedes essence, you must confront the reality that no external authority can tell you who you should be or how you should live. Your parents, your culture, your religion, your society can offer suggestions and impose consequences, but they cannot determine your essential nature because you have none apart from what you create. This realization can produce profound anxiety, but also unprecedented freedom. Consider how this affects moral decision-making. Traditional ethics often relies on discovering the right action through reason, divine command, or natural law. Existential ethics suggests that you create right and wrong through the choices you make and the values you embody through action. When you consistently choose honesty even when it costs you, you are not following some pre-existing moral law. You are creating honesty as a value through your pattern of choices. The value exists because you choose to live by it, not because it exists independently waiting for you to discover it. This creates what Sartre called the anguish of freedom. Every choice carries enormous weight because each decision literally shapes who you are becoming. You cannot blame genetics, upbringing, or circumstances for your choices because you retain the fundamental freedom to choose differently in each moment. Even your past actions do not determine your future choices, though they certainly influence the situations you face. The concept also revolutionizes how we understand personal growth and change. Traditional psychology often focuses on helping people discover their authentic self or overcome barriers to expressing their true nature. Existential psychology recognizes that there is no fixed self to discover. Personal growth involves consciously choosing what kind of person to become and then taking the actions necessary to create that identity. You are not trapped by personality tests, childhood experiences, or psychological categories because your essence emerges from your ongoing choices rather than predetermined factors. This insight extends to relationships as well. When you love someone, you are not loving their essential, unchanging nature. You are loving the person they have created themselves to be through their choices, while recognizing that they remain free to change and grow in unexpected directions. This can make relationships feel less secure but more genuine, because authentic love must be continually chosen rather than based on fixed characteristics. The workplace provides another arena where this philosophy transforms understanding. Career counseling traditionally focuses on matching people to jobs that suit their natural talents and interests. An existential approach recognizes that you create your professional identity through the choices you make about what work to pursue and how to approach that work. You do not have a predetermined calling waiting to be discovered. You create your calling through the pattern of choices you make about what kind of professional to become. Perhaps most importantly, understanding that existence precedes essence provides a foundation for taking full responsibility for your life. You cannot claim that you had no choice, that your personality made you do it, or that circumstances forced your hand. While external factors certainly influence your situation, your response to those factors remains fundamentally free. This responsibility can feel overwhelming, but it also represents the source of human dignity and the foundation for authentic living. The concept challenges therapeutic approaches that focus primarily on understanding the past or uncovering hidden aspects of personality. While these elements matter, existential therapy emphasizes the choices available in the present moment and the future identity being created through current decisions. Healing involves not just understanding what shaped you, but consciously choosing who to become moving forward. This revolutionary insight about existence and essence ultimately returns us to the fundamental question of what it means to be human. Rather than being creatures designed for specific purposes or programmed with particular natures, humans emerge as the unique beings who exist first and then must create their own meaning, purpose, and identity through the ongoing process of choice and action. This is both the burden and the glory of human existence, the terrifying freedom to author our own lives in a universe that offers no predetermined script. Part 2, the terrifying weight of radical freedom. Freedom in existentialist thought bears no resemblance to the casual liberty celebrated in political slogans or consumer choices. This is not the freedom to choose between different brands of cereal or the right to vote for preferred candidates. Existential freedom is absolute, inescapable, and fundamentally terrifying because it places the full weight of responsibility for your existence squarely on your own shoulders. Jean-Paul Sartre proclaimed that humans are condemned to be free, a phrase that captures the paradoxical nature of a freedom we never asked for but cannot escape. This condemnation to freedom begins with the simple fact that you did not choose to exist. No one consulted you about whether you wanted to be born into this particular family, culture, historical moment, or set of circumstances. Yet here you are, conscious and aware, forced to make countless decisions about who to become and how to live. Even the refusal to choose represents a choice with profound consequences for your identity and relationships. Consider the weight of this freedom in practical terms. When you wake up each morning, you face an almost infinite array of possibilities about how to spend your time, energy, and attention. You could quit your job, call an old friend, learn a new language, volunteer for a cause, or simply stay in bed. Each choice eliminates thousands of other possibilities and moves you toward becoming a particular kind of person. The responsibility for these choices cannot be delegated to parents, society, or even rational analysis, because ultimately you must choose which reasons to accept as compelling. This freedom extends far beyond individual lifestyle choices into the realm of values and meaning. Traditional societies provided clear frameworks for determining what mattered, what goals to pursue, and what constituted a life well lived. Modern existential freedom means you must choose not only what to do, but what to value, what to consider meaningful, and what principles to live by. No external authority can make these choices for you, because doing so would violate the fundamental nature of human consciousness as free and self-creating. The freedom becomes most apparent and most frightening in moments of major life transitions. Graduating from school, ending a relationship, facing a medical diagnosis, or losing a loved one strips away familiar routines and forces confrontation with the basic questions of existence. In these moments, the comfortable illusion that your life path was predetermined or inevitable crumbles, revealing the stark reality of your freedom to choose how to respond. Sartre illustrated this through his famous example of a man approaching a cliff. The man feels vertigo not just from the physical danger of falling, but from the recognition that nothing prevents him from choosing to jump. His freedom is so complete that even self-preservation becomes a choice rather than an automatic response. This recognition produces what Sartre called anguish, the emotional response to confronting the full scope of human freedom. The anguish of freedom manifests differently than ordinary fear or anxiety. When you fear a specific threat, like losing your job or ending a relationship, you can take concrete steps to address the danger. Existential anguish emerges from recognizing that your fundamental choices about identity, values, and meaning cannot be guaranteed or secured through external means. You must choose who to become without any assurance that your choices will lead to happiness, success, or fulfillment. This freedom creates what existentialists call the burden of choice. Every decision carries moral weight because it reflects and shapes who you are becoming. When you choose to lie to avoid conflict, you are not just solving a momentary problem, but creating yourself as someone who values peace over honesty in difficult situations. When you choose to confront uncomfortable truths, you create yourself as someone who values authenticity over comfort. These choices accumulate over time to form your identity. But each individual choice must be made without full knowledge of its long-term consequences. The workplace provides a clear example of how this freedom operates in daily life. You might claim that economic necessity forces you to remain in a job that conflicts with your values or stifles your growth. Existentialists would argue that you are freely choosing to prioritize financial security over other possible values like creativity, integrity, or personal growth. This choice is understandable and perhaps wise, but it remains a choice rather than an unavoidable necessity. Recognizing it as a choice opens the possibility of choosing differently if your priorities shift. Relationships reveal another dimension of radical freedom. You cannot force another person to love you, respect you, or meet your emotional needs, because doing so would violate their fundamental freedom. Similarly, you remain free to change your feelings, commitments, and level of investment in any relationship. This creates the possibility of genuine intimacy based on free choice. But it also means that no relationship can ever be completely secure or guaranteed. The freedom extends to your emotional responses as well. While you cannot directly control what you feel, you retain significant freedom in how you interpret, express, and act on your emotions. Someone who has experienced betrayal faces a choice about whether to become bitter and closed off, or to use the experience as an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding of human complexity. The emotion of hurt or anger may arise spontaneously, but the response to that emotion involves free choice. This radical freedom challenges therapeutic approaches that focus primarily on understanding past trauma or unconscious motivations. While these factors certainly influence current choices, existential therapy emphasizes that you remain free to choose how to respond to your history and unconscious patterns. Healing involves not just understanding what shaped you, but taking responsibility for who you choose to become moving forward. The concept of radical freedom also transforms how we understand moral responsibility. Traditional ethics might excuse certain behaviors based on difficult circumstances, psychological disorders, or social pressures. Existentialism maintains that these factors influence but do not eliminate your fundamental freedom to choose how to respond to your situation. This places enormous responsibility on each individual, but also preserves human dignity by refusing to reduce people to the products of forces beyond their control. The freedom becomes particularly challenging when facing systemic oppression or severe constraints. Someone living in poverty, facing discrimination, or dealing with serious illness has dramatically fewer options than someone with wealth, privilege, and good health. Existentialists do not ignore these real constraints, but maintain that even within severe limitations, some degree of choice about attitude, response, and meaning remains possible. Viktor Frankl's experiences in Nazi concentration camps exemplified this principle, as he found ways to maintain inner freedom and create meaning even under the most dehumanizing conditions. The recognition of radical freedom can initially produce despair or paralysis as the full weight of responsibility becomes apparent. Every choice matters enormously because each decision shapes not only your immediate circumstances but your ongoing identity and character. Yet this same recognition can become a source of empowerment and dignity. If you are truly free to choose who to become, then no past mistake, current limitation, or external judgment can permanently define you. You retain the capacity to choose differently and begin creating a new identity through different actions and commitments. Understanding radical freedom ultimately requires accepting that existence involves constant choice without complete information, security, or guarantee of positive outcomes. This is the human condition, simultaneously terrifying and magnificent in its possibilities. The freedom that initially appears as a burden can transform into the foundation for authentic living and genuine self-creation. Part 3. The nausea of existence and contingency. Existence itself possesses a quality that most people spend their lives trying to ignore or explain away. Jean-Paul Sartre captured this quality in his concept of nausea, the visceral recognition that existence is fundamentally contingent, unnecessary, and absurd. This is not the temporary nausea of physical illness, but a profound disorientation that emerges when you truly grasp that nothing in existence, including your own life, has any inherent justification or necessity. Everything that exists, including yourself, could just as easily not exist, and this recognition can produce a deep sense of unease and vertigo. Sartre illustrated this concept through his protagonist Antoine Roquentin in the novel Nausea, who experiences a moment of profound revelation while looking at a chestnut tree. Suddenly, the tree ceases to be simply a familiar object in his environment and reveals itself as a brute fact of existence with no reason for being. It is not beautiful, useful, or meaningful in any inherent sense. It simply exists, and this existence strikes him as fundamentally absurd and overwhelming. This moment represents the philosophical insight that existence precedes essence, extended to its logical conclusion. Nothing exists for a reason. Everything simply is. This contingency extends beyond individual objects to encompass all of reality. The laws of physics, the structure of society, your personal history, and even your own consciousness could have been completely different or might never have existed at all. There is nothing necessary or inevitable about the particular configuration of reality you inhabit. This recognition can produce what Sartre called nausea, a feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer arbitrariness and groundlessness of existence. Consider how this insight affects your daily experience of familiar objects and routines. A coffee cup sitting on your desk typically appears as a simple, useful object for containing beverages. But if you truly contemplate its existence, it becomes strange and arbitrary. Why should there be such things as coffee cups? Why should humans have developed the practice of drinking hot liquids from ceramic containers? Why should ceramics exist at all? These questions reveal the fundamental contingency underlying even the most mundane aspects of experience. The nausea of existence becomes most acute when the usual meaning-making systems break down. During periods of depression, grief, or major life transitions, the activities and relationships that normally provide structure and purpose can suddenly appear arbitrary and meaningless. Going to work, maintaining friendships, pursuing goals, all the activities that typically feel important and necessary can reveal themselves as optional and contingent arrangements that could be completely different. This recognition challenges the human tendency to create explanatory narratives that make existence feel necessary and meaningful. People often construct elaborate justifications for why their life unfolded as it did, why they made particular choices, or why certain events were meant to happen. The experience of nausea cuts through these comfortable stories and exposes their arbitrary nature. Your life could have gone in countless different directions, and there is nothing inherently special or necessary about the particular path you have followed. The contingency of existence also affects how you understand your own identity and characteristics. The personality traits, interests, values and preferences that feel like essential aspects of who you are actually represent contingent outcomes of countless arbitrary factors. If you'd been born in a different time period, culture, or family situation, you would likely have developed completely different characteristics while still feeling that these alternative traits represented your true self. This insight can produce profound disorientation because it undermines the sense that your life has a coherent narrative or inevitable trajectory. Instead of being the protagonist of a meaningful story, you begin to see yourself as a random collection of contingent characteristics navigating an equally arbitrary world. This realization can initially feel destabilizing and depressing, leading some people to retreat into various forms of denial or distraction. The nausea of existence also reveals the inadequacy of traditional sources of meaning and comfort. Religious explanations that place existence within a divine plan, or secular philosophies that ground meaning in progress, reason, or human nature, all appear as arbitrary constructions when viewed from this perspective. None of these systems can eliminate the fundamental contingency of existence. They can only provide temporary relief from confronting it directly. However, Sartre and other existentialists did not view this recognition as purely negative or destructive. The nausea of existence, while initially disturbing, can serve as a clearing away of false comforts that open space for more authentic engagement with life. When you fully accept the contingency and groundlessness of existence, you stop waiting for external validation or cosmic justification for your choices. This recognition can paradoxically become liberating because it reveals that since nothing is inherently necessary or meaningful, you are free to create meaning through your own choices and commitments. The workplace provides a common arena where people experience versions of existential nausea. During moments of burnout or disillusionment, the tasks that normally feel important and necessary can suddenly appear arbitrary and pointless. Attending meetings, responding to emails, pursuing promotions, all the activities that structure professional life can reveal themselves as contingent social arrangements with no inherent significance. This recognition can lead either to cynical resignation or to a more authentic engagement with work based on consciously chosen values rather than unexamined assumptions. Relationships can also trigger experiences of existential nausea when the familiar patterns and expectations that normally provide structure suddenly appear arbitrary. The roles of partner, parent, friend, or colleague can feel like costumes you are wearing rather than expressions of your essential identity. This recognition does not necessarily mean these relationships are false or worthless, but it can force a more conscious examination of which connections represent authentic choice versus social habit or obligation. The concept of nausea also helps explain why certain life transitions feel so disorienting. Graduation, retirement, divorce, or the death of a loved one can strip away familiar structures and routines, exposing the contingent nature of the identity and meaning you had constructed around these arrangements. The resulting disorientation reflects not just loss of specific relationships or roles, but confrontation with the fundamental arbitrariness underlying all human arrangements. Art and creativity often emerge from engagement with existential nausea rather than attempts to avoid it. Artists who honestly confront the contingency and absurdity of existence can create works that help others recognize and process these same insights. Rather than providing false comfort or easy answers, authentic artistic expression acknowledges the groundlessness of existence while demonstrating the possibility of creating meaning and beauty within that groundlessness. The therapeutic implications of understanding nausea extend beyond individual healing to encompass a different approach to mental health itself. Rather than viewing existential anxiety or the recognition of meaninglessness as symptoms to be eliminated, existential therapy can help people develop the capacity to tolerate and even embrace these insights as part of authentic living. The goal becomes not the elimination of existential discomfort, but the development of courage to face reality directly and create meaning despite its fundamental contingency. Understanding the nausea of existence ultimately provides a foundation for more honest and courageous engagement with life. When you stop expecting existence to justify itself or provide inherent meaning, you can focus your energy on the creative task of making life meaningful through your own choices and commitments. The recognition that nothing is necessary paradoxically reveals that everything is possible. Part 4. Bad faith and the escape from freedom. Most human beings cannot tolerate the full weight of existential freedom and responsibility for more than brief moments. The recognition that you must create your own essence, values and meaning without external guarantees produces such intense anxiety that people develop elaborate strategies to deny or escape their fundamental freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre called these strategies bad faith, forms of self-deception that allow individuals to pretend they have no choice in their circumstances or identity. Bad faith represents one of the most pervasive and subtle obstacles to authentic living because it disguises itself as rational, necessary or virtuous while actually representing a flight from the responsibility of being human. Bad faith operates by denying one or both of the fundamental aspects of human existence that make freedom possible. Humans exist simultaneously as conscious subjects who can imagine alternatives and make choices, and as physical objects embedded in particular circumstances and possessing specific characteristics. This dual nature creates both the possibility of freedom and the temptation to escape into bad faith by overemphasizing one aspect while denying the other. The most common form of bad faith involves treating yourself as if you were merely an object with fixed characteristics rather than a free subject capable of choice and change. Consider someone who consistently arrives late to appointments and explains this behavior by saying, "I am just not a punctual person." This statement reflects bad faith because it treats punctuality as a fixed characteristic rather than the result of ongoing choices about priorities and time management. The person avoids taking responsibility for their lateness by pretending they have no choice in the matter, when in reality they are choosing other priorities over punctuality in each specific situation. This pattern extends to much more significant aspects of identity and behavior. People often claim they cannot change their personality, overcome their fears, or pursue their dreams because of their temperament, background, or circumstances. While these factors certainly influence available options and make some choices more difficult than others, treating them as absolute barriers represents a form of bad faith that denies the fundamental human capacity for self-creation and change. The workplace provides countless examples of bad faith in daily operation. An employee might claim they have no choice but to compromise their values because that is just how business works, or "I need this job to pay my bills." While practical constraints certainly exist, framing these situations as having no choice represents bad faith. The employee is choosing to prioritize job security over personal integrity, which may be a reasonable choice, but should be acknowledged as a choice rather than an inevitable necessity. Bad faith can also take the opposite form, treating yourself as pure freedom without acknowledging the real constraints and circumstances that shape your situation. This might appear as the belief that you can achieve anything through positive thinking, willpower, or determination alone, while ignoring factors like economic inequality, discrimination, physical limitations, or other genuine barriers. This form of bad faith avoids the anxiety of confronting real limitations by pretending that consciousness has unlimited power to reshape reality. Sartre illustrated bad faith through his famous example of a waiter who becomes completely absorbed in playing the role of the perfect waiter. The waiter moves with exaggerated precision, anticipates customers' needs with theatrical attentiveness, and seems to embody the essence of waiterness in every gesture. This performance represents bad faith because the waiter uses the role to avoid confronting deeper questions about identity, purpose, and choice. By becoming completely identified with the social role, The waiter escapes the anxiety of having to choose who to be beyond the predetermined script that society provides. This pattern appears throughout social life as people lose themselves in roles like parent, professional, spouse, or citizen. While these roles provide valuable structure and meaning, they become expressions of bad faith when used to avoid the ongoing responsibility of consciously choosing how to interpret and embody these roles. A parent who claims they have no choice but to sacrifice all personal interests, because that is what good parents do, may be using the parental role to escape the anxiety of balancing competing values and responsibilities. Bad faith often disguises itself as virtue, responsibility, or selflessness. Someone might remain in an unhappy marriage, claiming they are staying for the children, when they are actually choosing to avoid the difficulty and uncertainty of creating a different life. Similarly, people might avoid pursuing meaningful goals by claiming they are being realistic or responsible, when they are actually choosing security over the risk of authentic self-creation. The phenomenon of bad faith helps explain why many therapeutic approaches focus on helping people recognize their capacity for choice in situations where they feel trapped or powerless. Depression and anxiety often involve forms of bad faith, where individuals convince themselves they have no options or that their current situation is inevitable. Recovery frequently requires recognizing the ways in which apparent helplessness actually represents unconscious choices about what to attempt, what risks to take, and what possibilities to pursue. Bad faith can also appear in relationships when people use romantic love as an escape from the responsibility of self-creation. Someone might lose themselves completely in a romantic relationship, deriving all sense of identity and worth from their partner's approval and affection. This represents bad faith because it uses the relationship to avoid the anxiety of creating independent meaning and value. Authentic love requires maintaining your freedom and responsibility while choosing to share your life with another free being. Consumer culture provides numerous opportunities for bad faith by offering identity through purchasing decisions and lifestyle choices. People might convince themselves that buying particular products, following certain trends, or adopting specific aesthetic choices expresses their authentic self when these behaviors actually represent conformity to external expectations and the avoidance of deeper self-examination. The marketplace promises ready-made identities that eliminate the anxiety of self-creation, but ultimately represent sophisticated forms of bad faith. Political and ideological commitment can also become forms of bad faith when used to avoid individual responsibility for moral reasoning and choice. Someone might adopt a political ideology or religious belief system and then claim they have no choice but to follow its dictates in specific situations. While these frameworks can provide valuable guidance, treating them as absolute authorities that eliminate the need for personal judgment represents a flight from freedom into bad faith. The recognition of bad faith creates a therapeutic and philosophical challenge because complete authenticity appears impossible to maintain consistently. Everyone engages in forms of self-deception and relies on social roles, routines, and belief systems that reduce the overwhelming nature of constant choice. The goal is not to eliminate all forms of bad faith, but to recognize when these patterns prevent growth, authentic relationships, or meaningful engagement with life's challenges. Overcoming bad faith requires developing tolerance for the anxiety and uncertainty that accompany authentic choice. This involves regularly examining your motivations, questioning your assumptions about what you must do, and taking responsibility for the values you express through your actions rather than the values you claim to hold in theory. It means recognizing that even your deepest convictions and commitments represent ongoing choices that must be renewed rather than fixed characteristics that define you permanently. The concept of bad faith ultimately serves as a diagnostic tool for recognizing when you are avoiding the fundamental responsibility of human existence. By understanding the various forms that bad faith can take, you can develop greater awareness of your own patterns of self-deception and begin the challenging work of living more authentically, despite the anxiety this authenticity inevitably produces. Part 5. Authenticity as radical honesty. Authenticity in existential terms bears no resemblance to the popular notion of being yourself or following your heart. These comfortable platitudes assume you possess a predetermined self waiting to be discovered and expressed. Existential authenticity involves the far more demanding task of taking complete responsibility for creating yourself, while maintaining radical honesty about your freedom, your situation, and your choices. This represents not self-discovery, but ongoing self-creation through conscious choice, coupled with the courage to acknowledge the fundamental groundlessness of all human values and meanings. Authentic living begins with what Martin Heidegger called resoluteness, the willingness to own your choices completely without seeking external validation or cosmic justification. This means accepting that your values, goals, and identity emerge from your decisions rather than from discovering some essential truth about yourself or the universe. When you act authentically, you do so while fully acknowledging that you could choose differently, and that your choices create rather than express your identity. Consider how this applies to career decisions, one of the most common areas where people struggle with authenticity. An inauthentic approach might involve endlessly searching for your true calling, or waiting to discover what you were meant to do with your life. An authentic approach recognizes that you create your calling through the choices you make about what work to pursue and how to approach that work. If you choose to become a teacher, you do not do so because teaching represents your essential nature, but because you have decided to create yourself as someone who values education and human development. The meaning emerges from your commitment and actions, not from predetermined destiny. Authenticity requires maintaining awareness of what Sartre called your situation while refusing to be determined by it. Your situation includes all the factors you cannot choose: your historical moment, your family background, your physical characteristics, your economic circumstances, and countless other constraints that limit your options. Inauthenticity involves either denying these constraints or allowing them to completely determine your choices. Authenticity requires acknowledging your situation honestly while taking responsibility for how you respond to these limitations. This balance appears clearly in how people respond to systemic oppression or discrimination. Someone facing racism, sexism, or economic inequality cannot simply choose to eliminate these barriers through individual effort alone. However, they retain significant freedom in how they interpret these challenges, what strategies they pursue for addressing them, and what kind of person they choose to become in response to injustice. Authenticity involves neither denying the reality of oppression nor allowing it to eliminate all sense of personal agency and choice. Authentic relationships require particularly demanding forms of honesty because they involve ongoing interaction with other free beings who are also creating themselves through their choices. Inauthentic relationships often involve trying to control or predict the other person, treating them as a fixed object whose responses you can manipulate or count on. Authentic relationships require accepting the fundamental uncertainty that comes from loving someone who remains free to change, grow, or even leave at any moment. This creates what existentialists call the paradox of authentic love. You want to be loved freely by someone who chooses to love you rather than someone who feels compelled or obligated to do so. Yet you also want this love to be reliable and enduring, which seems to conflict with its freely chosen nature. Authentic relationships require accepting this paradox rather than trying to resolve it by controlling the other person or guaranteeing the relationship's permanence through external commitments alone. Authenticity in relationships also demands honesty about your own changing nature and evolving values. Rather than pretending to be consistent across time or trying to meet expectations based on who you used to be, authentic relating involves communicating honestly about who you are becoming and what matters to you now. This can create instability and conflict, but it also opens possibilities for relationships based on genuine understanding rather than projection and assumption. The workplace presents particular challenges for authentic living because professional environments often reward conformity, predictability, and the suppression of personal values in favor of organizational goals. Authenticity in professional settings does not require dramatic rebellion or the rejection of all compromise. Instead, it involves making conscious choices about how to balance personal integrity with practical necessities while taking full responsibility for these choices. An authentic professional might choose to remain in a job that requires some compromise of their values, while clearly acknowledging this as a choice and working to minimize the areas of conflict. They would avoid the bad faith of claiming they have no choice, while also avoiding the impractical idealism of refusing all accommodation to organizational realities. The key lies in maintaining awareness of your choices and their consequences, rather than falling into unconscious patterns of behavior. Authenticity also requires honest engagement with your own mortality and the finite nature of human existence. This involves neither obsessing over death nor avoiding all thought of your eventual demise, but rather allowing awareness of finitude to inform your priorities and choices. When you truly accept that your time is limited and that no achievement or relationship will last forever, you can focus more clearly on what deserves your finite attention and energy. This temporal awareness transforms how you approach both success and failure. Neither achievements nor setbacks carry ultimate cosmic significance because both occur within the context of a brief human life that will eventually end. This recognition can reduce both the anxiety of potential failure and the inflation that comes with success, allowing for more measured and authentic responses to life's inevitable ups and downs. Authentic living also involves accepting responsibility for the broader consequences of your choices beyond their immediate effects on your own life. When you choose authentically, you implicitly recommend your choice as a possible way for other humans to live. This creates what Sartre called anguish for all humanity, because your individual choices contribute to the ongoing creation of human values and possibilities. This responsibility extends to political and social engagement as well. Authenticity cannot remain purely individual, because human existence is fundamentally social and interconnected. Your choices about how to live inevitably affect others and contribute to the social world that future generations will inhabit. This means authentic living often requires engagement with collective challenges and injustices rather than withdrawal into purely personal concerns. The practice of authenticity requires developing tolerance for uncertainty, anxiety, and the absence of external validation for your choices. You must learn to act based on your own carefully considered values while accepting that these values could be wrong, incomplete, or harmful in ways you cannot foresee. This vulnerability represents the price of authentic living, but also its greatest dignity, the willingness to take full responsibility for your existence without external guarantees or cosmic support. Therapeutic approaches based on existential authenticity focus less on achieving particular emotional states or life outcomes and more on developing the capacity for honest self-examination and responsible choice-making. The goal is not happiness, success, or even meaning in any traditional sense, but rather the ongoing practice of creating yourself consciously and courageously in full awareness of your freedom, your situation, and your responsibility for the consequences of your choices. Authenticity ultimately represents the existential alternative to both nihilistic despair and false comfort. When you accept that existence has no predetermined meaning or purpose, you can either retreat into cynicism and passivity, or embrace the creative challenge of making meaning through authentic choice and commitment. The authentic path requires courage but offers the possibility of creating a life that reflects your deepest values and commitments rather than external expectations or unconscious patterns. Part 6. Anxiety as the revelation of freedom. The anxiety that emerges from existential awareness differs fundamentally from ordinary fear, worry, or even clinical anxiety disorders. Existential anxiety represents your psyche's natural response to confronting the full scope of human freedom and responsibility. Rather than signaling pathology or indicating something that needs to be eliminated, this anxiety serves as a crucial revelation about the human condition and your capacity for authentic choice. Søren Kierkegaard first identified this phenomenon as angst, the dizzying recognition of your freedom to choose who to become in the face of infinite possibilities and no predetermined guidelines. This anxiety emerges most powerfully in moments when familiar structures and certainties dissolve, leaving you face to face with the raw fact of your freedom. Consider the experience of a college graduate facing an uncertain future, no longer protected by the clear expectations and milestones of academic life. The anxiety that often accompanies this transition reflects not just worry about practical concerns like employment or finances, but confrontation with the fundamental question of who to become when no external authority provides clear direction. Kierkegaard illustrated this through his famous example of standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling vertigo. The vertigo comes not from fear of accidentally falling, which would be ordinary fear, but from the recognition that nothing prevents you from choosing to jump. Your freedom is so complete that even self-preservation becomes a choice rather than an automatic response. This recognition produces what he called the dizziness of freedom, the overwhelming awareness of your capacity to choose in ways that could completely transform or even end your existence. The anxiety reveals itself differently across various life domains, but always points toward the same fundamental recognition of freedom and responsibility. In relationships, it appears as the unsettling awareness that you cannot control or guarantee another person's feelings toward you. No matter how loving, attractive, or devoted you are, your partner remains free to change their feelings, leave the relationship, or simply stop loving you. The anxiety emerges from recognizing that authentic relationships require constant risk and vulnerability without external guarantees of security or permanence. Career-related existential anxiety often manifests as the recognition that no job, profession, or achievement can provide ultimate security or meaning. Even the most successful career trajectory could be disrupted by economic changes, technological advancement, or personal health issues. More fundamentally, the anxiety reflects awareness that professional identity represents a choice about what to value and pursue rather than the discovery of some predetermined calling or natural fit. Parenting provides another arena where existential anxiety reveals the weight of freedom and responsibility. Parents often experience overwhelming anxiety, not just about their children's safety and well-being, but about the recognition that their parenting choices will fundamentally shape another human being's development and possibilities. There is no perfect parenting manual, no guaranteed method for raising healthy and happy children, and no way to protect children from eventually confronting their own existential challenges. The anxiety reflects the awesome responsibility of influencing another person's development while recognizing the limitations of that influence and the uncertainty of outcomes. This anxiety also appears in moral decision-making, particularly in complex situations where different ethical frameworks suggest conflicting courses of action. When facing choices about end-of-life care for a loved one, whistleblowing about organizational misconduct, or balancing competing family obligations, the anxiety often reflects recognition that you must choose without perfect information or guaranteed outcomes. The weight of making choices that affect others' lives while accepting responsibility for consequences you cannot fully predict creates the distinctive discomfort of existential anxiety. The temporal dimension of human existence intensifies this anxiety through awareness of mortality and the finite nature of all choices. Every choice eliminates countless other possibilities, and the limited nature of human lifespan means that choosing one path prevents exploration of many others. The anxiety emerges from recognizing that you must choose a particular life trajectory while acknowledging that countless other possible lives remain unexplored and that your time for making choices is fundamentally limited. Modern society often attempts to eliminate or medicate away existential anxiety rather than recognizing its valuable function as a signal of authentic engagement with the human condition. While severe anxiety can certainly interfere with daily functioning and may require therapeutic intervention, the complete elimination of existential anxiety would actually represent a loss of authentic awareness rather than psychological health. Some degree of anxiety serves as evidence that you are honestly confronting the weight of freedom and responsibility rather than retreating into bad faith or self-deception. The workplace provides numerous examples of how existential anxiety operates in daily life. Someone considering a career change might experience intense anxiety that reflects not just practical concerns about income or job security, but deeper questions about identity, purpose, and the meaning of work itself. The anxiety signals awareness that career choices create rather than express identity, and that professional decisions carry moral weight in terms of how you choose to spend your finite time and energy. Existential anxiety also appears in response to major life transitions like marriage, divorce, retirement, or the death of loved ones. These events strip away familiar routines and assumptions, forcing confrontation with fundamental questions about purpose, identity, and meaning that normally remain in the background. The resulting anxiety reflects the psyche's recognition that these transitions require conscious choice about who to become next, rather than automatic continuation of previous patterns. The experience of existential anxiety often includes what psychologists call meta-anxiety, anxiety about being anxious. People worry that their anxiety indicates weakness, mental illness, or inability to cope with normal life challenges. Understanding anxiety as a natural response to existential awareness can reduce this secondary anxiety and allow for more productive engagement with the underlying existential concerns that generate the initial discomfort. Therapeutic approaches that honor existential anxiety focus on developing tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity rather than eliminating anxiety altogether. This involves learning to distinguish between anxiety that signals authentic engagement with existential challenges and anxiety that represents avoidance or distortion of these challenges. The goal becomes increasing your capacity to remain present and thoughtful in the face of uncertainty rather than seeking false comfort through premature closure or external authorities. The anxiety of freedom can also serve as a catalyst for personal growth and authentic choice-making. When you learn to tolerate and even welcome existential anxiety as information about situations requiring conscious choice, you can use it as a guide for identifying areas of life that need attention or change. Rather than numbing the anxiety through distraction, substance use, or compulsive activity, you can explore what the anxiety reveals about your values, priorities, and authentic desires. Understanding existential anxiety ultimately requires accepting it as an inevitable companion to authentic living, rather than a problem to be solved. The anxiety signals that you are taking your freedom and responsibilities seriously, rather than hiding behind external authorities or predetermined roles. While it cannot be eliminated without retreating into bad faith, it can become a trusted indicator of moments when life is calling for conscious, authentic choice rather than automatic or habitual response. Part 7. The absurd and the silence of the universe. The concept of the absurd emerges from a fundamental conflict at the heart of human existence. Human consciousness naturally seeks meaning, purpose, and rational explanation for existence, yet the universe appears to offer no inherent meaning or response to these deep human needs. Albert Camus identified this collision between human desire for significance and cosmic silence as the absurd, a condition that generates profound philosophical and psychological challenges for anyone who confronts it honestly. The absurd does not refer to things that are merely silly or irrational, but to the existential situation of seeking answers from a universe that provides no replies. This absurdity reveals itself in countless daily experiences once you become aware of it. Consider the human tendency to ask why about almost everything that happens. Why did this relationship end? Why did this person become ill? Why does suffering exist? Why does anything exist at all? These questions feel natural and necessary to human consciousness, yet the universe provides no inherent answers beyond the mechanical explanations of natural science, which themselves raise deeper questions about why natural laws exist and why they take their particular form. The absurd becomes most apparent in moments of profound loss, suffering or disillusionment when the usual meaning-making systems break down. Someone who has worked diligently their entire life according to conventional definitions of success might suddenly confront the question of whether any of their achievements actually matter in any ultimate sense. A person facing terminal illness might recognize that all their plans, relationships, and accumulations of experience will shortly become meaningless to them personally, and will eventually be forgotten by everyone else as well. Camus illustrated the absurd through the myth of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time he reaches the summit. This image captures the human condition of pursuing goals and creating meaning, while knowing that death will eventually render all achievements temporary, and that the universe itself will eventually end. eliminating any possibility of permanent human legacy. Yet humans continue to push their boulders up their mountains, seeking meaning and purpose despite the apparent futility of these efforts. The recognition of absurdity can produce several different responses, not all of which Camus considered authentic or productive. One common reaction involves philosophical suicide, the retreat into religious or ideological systems that promise ultimate meaning and purpose despite the lack of rational evidence for these claims. While these belief systems can provide psychological comfort and social structure, Camus argued they represent intellectual dishonesty that avoids confronting the real human condition. Another response involves literal suicide, the conclusion that life without inherent meaning is not worth living. Camus famously declared that suicide represents the only truly serious philosophical problem because it forces the question of whether life is worth living in the absence of cosmic purpose or guarantee of ultimate significance. He rejected suicide as a solution because it represents surrender to absurdity rather than authentic engagement with the human condition. Instead, Camus advocated for what he called revolt, the decision to continue living and creating meaning despite full recognition of absurdity. This revolt does not involve trying to overcome or resolve the absurd, but rather accepting it as the permanent condition of human existence, while refusing to be defeated by it. The revolt includes maintaining human values like justice, beauty and compassion, not because they reflect cosmic truth, but because they represent authentic human responses to existence. This approach transforms how you understand the pursuit of goals and the creation of meaning in daily life. Rather than seeking activities that provide ultimate cosmic significance, you can focus on what brings immediate satisfaction, contributes to human flourishing, or expresses your authentic values and commitments. The meaning emerges from the quality of engagement and choice rather than from any external validation or permanent achievement. Consider how this applies to career and professional life. Traditional approaches often seek work that provides a sense of ultimate purpose or contribution to some greater cause. An absurdist approach might focus instead on work that allows for authentic expression of your values, provides opportunities for skill development and human connection, or simply offers sufficient resources to support the other activities you find meaningful. The work becomes valuable for what it allows you to experience and contribute in the present, rather than for any ultimate cosmic significance. Relationships take on different meaning when viewed through the lens of absurdity. Rather than seeking partnerships that promise eternal love or complete understanding, you might focus on connections that provide genuine intimacy, mutual support, and shared exploration of life's possibilities while accepting their temporary nature. The relationship becomes valuable for what it offers in the present, rather than for any guarantee of permanence or ultimate significance. The absurd also affects how you understand moral responsibility and ethical choice. Without cosmic backing for moral principles, ethical behavior cannot be justified through appeal to divine command, natural law, or universal reason. Yet this does not eliminate moral responsibility, but rather grounds it in human choice and commitment to particular values, despite their lack of ultimate foundation. You choose compassion over cruelty, not because compassion is cosmically required, but because you decide to create yourself as a compassionate person and contribute to a more compassionate world. This approach to ethics can actually increase rather than decrease moral seriousness because it places full responsibility on human choice rather than external authority. When you act ethically from an absurdist perspective, you do so knowing that you bear complete responsibility for these choices and their consequences, without the comfort of knowing that you are following divinely ordained or rationally necessary principles. The absurd also transforms how you approach creativity and aesthetic experience. Art, music, literature and other creative expressions become valuable not because they reveal eternal truths or cosmic purposes, but because they represent authentic human responses to existence and opportunities for meaningful engagement with life's possibilities. Creative work can express and process the experience of absurdity while demonstrating human capacity to create beauty and meaning within apparent meaninglessness. Education and intellectual pursuits take on different significance when approached from an absurdist perspective. Learning becomes valuable for the immediate satisfaction of curiosity, the development of human capabilities, and the enhancement of life's possibilities rather than for discovering ultimate truth or fulfilling predetermined purposes. Knowledge represents a form of revolt against ignorance and limitation, rather than progress towards some final understanding of reality. The concept of the absurd also provides a framework for understanding and coping with suffering, disappointment, and failure. Rather than seeking explanations for why bad things happen or trying to find silver linings in every difficulty, you can accept suffering as part of the absurd human condition while focusing on how to respond authentically and constructively. This approach can reduce the additional suffering that comes from demanding that life make sense or that difficulties serve some larger purpose. Living with awareness of the absurd requires developing what Camus called lucid indifference to ultimate questions while maintaining passionate engagement with immediate human concerns. This involves accepting that existence provides no final answers while refusing to let this recognition lead to cynicism or disengagement. The goal is to live fully and authentically within the absurd condition rather than seeking escape through false certainties or nihilistic resignation. Understanding the absurd ultimately provides a foundation for what Camus considered genuine freedom. When you stop seeking cosmic validation for your choices and instead focus on creating meaning through authentic engagement with life's possibilities, you become free to pursue what genuinely matters to you rather than what you think should matter based on external authorities or rational systems. The silence of the universe becomes not a source of despair, but an invitation to speak with your own voice. Part 8. Being toward death and the urgency of finitude. Death represents the ultimate horizon against which all human choices gain their meaning and urgency. Martin Heidegger's concept of being toward death reveals that awareness of mortality is not simply one concern among many, but the fundamental backdrop that gives significance to every decision, relationship, and moment of existence. This awareness does not involve morbid obsession with dying, but rather the recognition that life's finite nature is what makes choices matter and time precious. Without the reality of death, human existence would lose its urgency, and the decisions that define who we become would carry no real weight or consequence. Most people spend enormous energy avoiding direct confrontation with their mortality through various forms of denial, distraction, and symbolic immortality projects. They pursue careers, relationships, achievements, and legacies, partly as ways of avoiding the anxiety that comes from fully accepting life's temporary nature. Heidegger argued that this avoidance represents a fundamental form of inauthenticity because it prevents engagement with one of the most basic facts of human existence. Only by accepting mortality directly can you begin to make choices based on what genuinely matters, rather than on unconscious attempts to deny or overcome death. The awareness of mortality transforms the experience of time from an abstract concept into a lived reality of limitation and scarcity. When you truly accept that your days are numbered, each day becomes more precious and each choice more significant. This does not necessarily mean living with constant urgency or anxiety, but rather making decisions with clearer awareness of what deserves your finite attention and energy. The question shifts from, "What should I do with my unlimited future?" to "What is worth doing with the limited time I actually have?" Consider how this awareness might affect career choices and professional development. Rather than pursuing advancement, income or status based on abstract notions of success, you might focus more clearly on work that provides genuine satisfaction, contributes meaningfully to others' lives, or allows for authentic expression of your values and capabilities. The recognition that your working years are limited can clarify which professional compromises are acceptable and which represent unacceptable sacrifices of your finite time and energy. Relationships take on different meaning when approached with full awareness of their temporary nature. Rather than taking loved ones for granted or postponing important conversations and expressions of care, the recognition that all relationships will eventually end through death can inspire more intentional and authentic connection. This does not mean living in constant grief for future losses, but rather appreciating present relationships more fully while they exist. The temporary nature of connection can make it more rather than less precious when approached with courage rather than denial. The awareness of mortality also affects how you understand conflict and forgiveness in relationships. Petty disagreements and grudges often lose their grip when viewed against the backdrop of life's brevity. If you knew that you or someone you care about had only a short time left, many of the issues that normally consume emotional energy would appear trivial and unworthy of sustained attention. This perspective can provide guidance for choosing which conflicts deserve engagement and which represent wasteful distractions from more meaningful connection. Heidegger distinguished between authentic and inauthentic relationships to death. Inauthentic approaches treat death as something that happens to other people, something far in the future, or something that can be avoided through medical advances, healthy living, or positive thinking. These approaches allow people to maintain the illusion that they have unlimited time and that their choices carry no ultimate consequences. Authentic being toward death involves accepting mortality as your own inevitable reality that could occur at any moment and that definitively limits all your possibilities and projects. This acceptance can initially produce what existentialists call death anxiety, but this anxiety serves important functions in clarifying values and priorities. When you truly confront the reality that your time is limited and could end unpredictably, superficial concerns and artificial priorities often fall away, revealing what genuinely matters to you. The anxiety of mortality can become a clarifying force that helps distinguish between authentic desires and socially imposed expectations. The workplace provides numerous examples of how mortality awareness can transform professional engagement. Someone approaching retirement often experiences a shift in perspective that allows them to focus more clearly on meaningful contributions rather than political maneuvering or status-seeking. Similarly, people who have faced serious health scares often report that the experience helped them identify which aspects of their work truly mattered, and which represented meaningless busy work or ego gratification. Death awareness also affects how you approach personal growth and self-development. Rather than treating self-improvement as an endless project with unlimited time for completion, the recognition of mortality can inspire focus on the most important areas for growth, while accepting that you will never achieve perfection or complete all possible development. This can reduce perfectionism and procrastination while increasing engagement with meaningful learning and change. The question becomes not how can I become perfect, but how do I want to grow within my limited time? The awareness of finitude transforms how you understand legacy and the impact of your choices on future generations. Rather than seeking immortality through fame, wealth, or achievement, you might focus on contributions that reflect your authentic values, while accepting that even these contributions will eventually be forgotten. This can paradoxically free you to make choices based on present meaning rather than future recognition or permanence. Parenting takes on different dimensions when approached with full awareness of mortality. The recognition that your time with your children is limited can inspire more intentional presence and authentic relationship, while also accepting that you cannot protect them from eventually confronting their own mortality and existential challenges. This can reduce anxiety about perfect parenting while increasing focus on modeling authentic living and providing emotional resources for their own existential journey. The concept of being toward death also provides perspective on success and failure in various life domains. Both achievements and setbacks appear temporary when viewed against the backdrop of mortality, which can reduce both excessive pride in success and devastating disappointment in failure. This doesn't mean that outcomes do not matter, but rather that they matter within the context of a finite life rather than as permanent cosmic achievements or disasters. Creative expression and artistic pursuits often gain urgency and authenticity when approached with awareness of mortality. The recognition that your creative time is limited can inspire focus on work that genuinely expresses your perspective and values rather than work designed primarily for external approval or commercial success. The temporary nature of all creative work can paradoxically make it more meaningful by emphasizing the present experience of creation rather than future permanence. Understanding being toward death ultimately provides a foundation for what existentialists call authentic temporality, a way of experiencing time that honors both the finite nature of existence and the ongoing possibilities available within those limits. This involves living with awareness that every moment is irreplaceable while maintaining engagement with future possibilities and appreciation for past experiences. The goal is not to eliminate death anxiety, but to use that anxiety as information about what deserves your precious and limited attention. This awareness can transform daily life by providing a consistent reference point for evaluating choices and priorities. Rather than getting lost in immediate pressures or social expectations, you can regularly ask yourself what choices align with your values and desires when viewed against the backdrop of your finite existence. This practice can serve as an antidote to both trivial distractions and overwhelming complexity by returning focus to what matters most within the limited time available. Part 9. The Other and the Challenge of Intersubjectivity. The existence of other conscious beings presents one of the most complex challenges in existential philosophy. If each person is fundamentally free to create their own essence and meaning, how do we understand genuine relationships between these self-creating beings? Jean-Paul Sartre explored this challenge through his analysis of the look and his famous declaration that hell is other people, revealing how the presence of others can simultaneously threaten and enrich authentic existence. The problem of the other forces confrontation with questions about love, responsibility, recognition, and the possibility of authentic human connection in a world where everyone is creating themselves through their own choices. Sartre's concept of the look illustrates how other people can transform your self-understanding in ways that feel both invasive and revelatory. Consider the experience of doing something embarrassing while alone versus being observed by another person. When alone, you might trip over furniture, sing off-key, or make mistakes without experiencing shame or self-consciousness. The moment another person observes you, however, you suddenly see yourself through their eyes and experience shame, embarrassment, or the desire to control their impression of you. This transformation reveals how others have the power to turn you into an object of their perception, while simultaneously making you aware of yourself as a subject who exists for others. This dynamic creates what Sartre called being for others, a fundamental dimension of human existence that cannot be avoided or eliminated. Your identity partially depends on how others see you, respond to you, and treat you, yet you cannot control their perceptions or guarantee their understanding. This creates ongoing tension between your experience of yourself as a free subject, creating your own meaning, and your awareness of yourself as an object in other people's consciousness. The challenge involves maintaining authentic self-creation while engaging meaningfully with others who are simultaneously subjects for themselves and objects in your own consciousness. Love relationships reveal this challenge most intensely because they involve the desire for deep connection with another free being whose inner experience remains fundamentally inaccessible. When you love someone, you want to be loved in return, but this creates a paradox that Sartre explored extensively. You want the other person's love to be freely chosen rather than compelled or obligated, yet you also want it to be certain and permanent. You cannot force genuine love without destroying what makes it valuable, yet freely chosen love remains unpredictable and could end at any moment. This paradox reflects the broader challenge of relating to others as free subjects rather than controllable objects. The problem intensifies when you recognize that your beloved also exists as a free subject, creating their own meaning and identity. The person you fell in love with will continue changing and growing through their own choices, potentially becoming someone quite different from the person who initially attracted you. Authentic love requires supporting their freedom to change, while accepting that this freedom might eventually lead them away from you. This creates what existentialists call the impossible project of love, the desire to possess another person's freedom while preserving what makes them worth loving. Sartre initially took a pessimistic view of human relationships, suggesting that people inevitably try to control or possess each other rather than relating as free subjects. His partner Simone de Beauvoir offered a more optimistic perspective, arguing that authentic relationships can enhance rather than threaten individual freedom. She suggested that when two people recognize and support each other's fundamental freedom, they can create shared meanings and projects without falling into the trap of treating each other as objects to be controlled or possessed. This more optimistic view requires what might be called radical acceptance of the other person's freedom and unpredictability. Rather than seeking security through controlling or predicting your partner's responses, authentic relationship involves continuously choosing to engage with them as they are in the present moment, while accepting that they remain free to change, grow, or leave. This approach can create deeper intimacy because it requires ongoing choice rather than assumption or obligation. The workplace provides numerous examples of how the challenge of relating to others as subjects rather than objects affects daily life. Management approaches that treat employees primarily as resources to be optimized or controlled fail to recognize their fundamental nature as free subjects creating their own meaning through work. More effective leadership often involves recognizing employees' capacity for growth, change, and authentic contribution while providing structures that support rather than eliminate their fundamental freedom and creativity. Parenting presents particularly complex challenges related to the other, because it involves relationship with developing beings who are gradually discovering and exercising their own freedom. Parents must provide guidance, structure and support, while gradually recognizing their children's emerging capacity for independent choice and self-creation. This requires a delicate balance between necessary protection and control during early development and increasing respect for the child's autonomy as they mature. Authentic parenting involves preparing children for their own existential challenges rather than trying to control their future choices or protect them from all difficulty and uncertainty. The political dimensions of relating to others as subjects become apparent when considering issues of justice, equality, and social organization. Political systems that treat people primarily as objects to be managed, controlled, or optimized fail to respect their fundamental nature as free beings capable of creating their own meaning and contributing to collective life. More authentic political approaches might focus on creating conditions that support everyone's capacity for authentic choice, while recognizing that genuine democracy requires ongoing negotiation between free subjects rather than control by authorities. The challenge of the other also affects how we understand empathy and emotional connection. Traditional approaches to empathy often involve trying to put yourself in another person's shoes or imagine how you would feel in their situation. Existential approaches recognize that other people's inner experience remains fundamentally inaccessible and that they may respond to similar situations in completely different ways based on their own freedom and self-creation. Authentic empathy might involve accepting this mystery while offering support for whatever the other person is actually experiencing, rather than what you assume they must be experiencing. Therapeutic relationships provide another arena where the challenge of the other becomes apparent. Effective therapy often involves the therapist's ability to relate to clients as capable subjects rather than broken objects to be fixed. This requires recognizing clients' fundamental capacity for choice and change while providing support for their own process of self-understanding and authentic living. The therapeutic relationship becomes a space for exploring authentic relating, rather than a technical intervention performed by an expert on a patient. The concept of the other also illuminates the challenge of cultural difference and cross-cultural understanding. People from different cultural backgrounds create meaning and identity through different frameworks, making mutual understanding complex and requiring genuine openness to perspectives that may challenge your own assumptions. Authentic cross-cultural relationship involves accepting that others may have fundamentally different approaches to meaning-making while seeking common ground in shared humanity and mutual respect for each other's freedom. Understanding the challenge of the other ultimately requires accepting that genuine human connection involves ongoing risk, uncertainty, and the possibility of misunderstanding or conflict. Rather than seeking relationships that provide complete security or perfect understanding, authentic relating focuses on mutual support for each person's freedom and growth within the inherent limitations and uncertainties of human connection. The goal becomes creating relationships that enhance rather than diminish everyone's capacity for authentic living, while accepting that such relationships require constant choice and renewal rather than automatic continuation. This perspective transforms how you understand loneliness, conflict, and the basic human need for connection. Loneliness might reflect not just the absence of others, but the absence of authentic relationships that recognize and support your fundamental freedom. Conflict might represent opportunities for deeper understanding rather than threats to be eliminated, and the need for connection can be met through relationships that honor rather than eliminate the mystery and freedom of the other. Part 10. Thrownness and the given conditions of existence. Human existence begins not with choice, but with what Martin Heidegger called thrownness, the brute fact of being thrown into existence without consultation, preparation, or control over the initial conditions of your life. You did not choose your historical moment, your family circumstances, your genetic inheritance, your cultural context, or the basic structure of human existence itself. Yet these unchosen factors profoundly shape the possibilities available to you and the context within which you must exercise your freedom to create yourself. Understanding thrownness reveals the complex relationship between freedom and facticity, between the choices you can make and the circumstances you must navigate in making those choices. Thrownness encompasses everything about your situation that you cannot change through individual choice or effort. This includes not only obvious factors like your birth family, historical period, and initial socio-economic circumstances, but also more subtle elements like the language you learned first, the cultural assumptions you absorbed before developing critical thinking, and the basic structure of human consciousness itself. You were thrown into a world where death is inevitable, where consciousness emerges from material processes you do not control, and where meaning must be created rather than discovered. These fundamental conditions of human existence shape every choice you make while remaining largely outside your direct influence. The concept of thrownness challenges both deterministic views that deny human freedom and naive views of freedom that ignore real constraints. You are neither completely free to create any life you choose nor completely determined by your circumstances. Instead, you exist in the tension between thrownness and freedom, exercising choice within conditions you did not select and cannot fully escape. This creates what existentialists call your situation, the unique intersection of thrown conditions and free response that defines the specific context of your existence. Consider how thrownness affects something as basic as language and conceptual thinking. The language you learned as a child shapes how you categorize experience, understand relationships, and even perceive reality itself. Different languages structure thought in different ways, making some concepts easy to express and others difficult or impossible within that linguistic framework. You cannot step outside language entirely to achieve some objective view of reality, yet you retain significant freedom in how you use language, what you choose to express, and how you respond to the conceptual limitations of your linguistic inheritance. Historical thrownness provides another crucial dimension of the unchosen conditions that shape your existence. Being born in the 21st century rather than the medieval period fundamentally alters the possibilities available to you, the problems you face, and the resources you can draw upon in creating your life. You inherit both the achievements and the problems of previous generations, without having participated in the choices that created these conditions. Climate change, technological development, political institutions, and cultural achievements all represent aspects of your throne situation that result from others' choices but constrain and enable your own options. Economic thrownness significantly shapes the range of choices available to you throughout your life. Being born into wealth provides educational opportunities, social connections, and safety nets that make certain life paths much easier to pursue. Being born into poverty creates barriers and challenges that require enormous effort to overcome, if they can be overcome at all. These economic conditions represent aspects of thrownness that profoundly influence your possibilities while remaining largely outside your control, especially during childhood and adolescence when foundational choices about education and development are being made. Cultural thrownness involves the values, assumptions and practices you absorbed before developing the capacity for critical reflection. Growing up in a particular religious tradition, political system or social class shapes your initial understanding of what life is about, what goals are worth pursuing, and how relationships should function. These cultural influences operate below the level of conscious choice, creating preferences and assumptions that feel natural but actually reflect particular historical and social arrangements. You can examine and modify these inherited patterns, but you cannot escape cultural influence entirely or start from a completely neutral position. Physical thrownness includes your genetic inheritance, early health experiences, and basic bodily characteristics that influence your capabilities and limitations throughout life. Inheriting particular physical abilities, health vulnerabilities, or neurological differences creates a specific context within which you must exercise your freedom to create yourself. These physical aspects of thrownness do not determine your choices, but they certainly influence the range of possibilities available and the strategies required to pursue different goals. Gender represents a particularly complex aspect of thrownness because it involves both biological and social elements that are largely unchosen but profoundly influential. The gender assigned at birth based on biological characteristics becomes the basis for social expectations, role assignments, and differential treatment that shapes development in ways both obvious and subtle. While individuals retain significant freedom in how they understand and express gender, they cannot escape the social reality of gender categories and their associated expectations, privileges and limitations. The family system into which you are born represents another crucial dimension of thrownness that affects emotional development, attachment patterns, and basic approaches to relationships. Growing up with supportive, consistent caregivers creates different possibilities for trust, intimacy, and self-worth than growing up with absent, inconsistent, or abusive caregivers. These early relational experiences create what psychologists call internal working models that influence how you approach relationships throughout life, though these patterns can be modified through conscious effort and new experiences. Understanding thrownness helps explain why existential authenticity requires such courage and ongoing effort. You must create yourself not from a blank slate, but within and against conditions that were largely established before you developed the capacity for conscious choice. This means that authentic living involves not just making free choices, but examining and responding to the unchosen influences that shape your preferences, assumptions, and available options. The process of becoming authentic requires distinguishing between aspects of yourself that reflect genuine choice and aspects that simply represent unexamined inheritance from your thrown conditions. The workplace provides clear examples of how thrownness and freedom interact in daily life. Your educational background, family connections, and early work experiences create a particular range of career possibilities while closing off others. Someone born into a family of doctors has different professional opportunities and pressures than someone born into a family of manual labourers. Yet within these constraints, significant freedom remains in how you approach your work, what values you express through professional choices, and how you respond to the opportunities and limitations your background provides. Thrownness also affects how you understand personal responsibility and moral judgment. While everyone retains fundamental responsibility for their choices and actions, the concept of thrownness reveals that people face very different circumstances and constraints in exercising this responsibility. Someone dealing with the thrown conditions of poverty, trauma, or discrimination faces different challenges in living authentically than someone with the advantages of wealth, stability, and privilege. This does not eliminate personal responsibility, but it requires more nuanced understanding of how circumstances affect the difficulty of authentic choice and the range of available options. Therapeutic approaches that incorporate understanding of thrownness focus on helping people distinguish between what they can and cannot change in their situation, while supporting their capacity to respond authentically to both the possibilities and limitations they face. This involves examining how thrown conditions continue to influence current choices while developing skills and perspectives that expand the range of authentic responses available within those conditions. The goal is not to overcome thrownness, which is impossible, but to respond to it more consciously and authentically. The concept of thrownness ultimately provides a more realistic foundation for understanding both human freedom and human solidarity. Recognizing that everyone faces unchosen conditions that constrain their possibilities can create empathy for others' struggles while inspiring appreciation for the courage required to live authentically within any set of circumstances. At the same time, understanding your own thrownness can reduce both excessive self-blame for difficult circumstances and unrealistic expectations about what individual choice alone can accomplish. This perspective transforms how you approach both personal growth and social change. Individual development involves working creatively with your thrown conditions rather than trying to escape or overcome them entirely. Social progress involves changing systemic conditions that unnecessarily limit people's possibilities while recognizing that some aspects of the human condition, like mortality and the need for meaning, cannot be eliminated through social reform. Both individual authenticity and collective justice require honest engagement with the interplay between freedom and thrownness rather than denial of either element. Understanding thrownness provides perspective on both achievement and failure by revealing how success and difficulty emerge from the intersection of individual choice with unchosen circumstances. This can reduce both excessive pride in accomplishments and devastating shame about struggles by placing individual efforts within their appropriate context. The goal becomes not eliminating the influence of thrown conditions, but responding to them with increasing awareness, courage, and authentic choice within whatever possibilities remain available. Part 11. The They-Self and the Tyranny of the Average. One of the most subtle threats to authentic existence comes not from dramatic external oppression, but from the pervasive influence of what Martin Heidegger called das Man, typically translated as the they-self or the anonymous public. This represents the powerful tendency to lose yourself in conventional thinking, average opinions, and socially acceptable behaviors that require no personal reflection or individual responsibility. The they-self operates through seemingly innocent social mechanisms like popular opinion, conventional wisdom and normal expectations that gradually erode your capacity for independent thought and authentic choice. Unlike obvious forms of coercion, the they-self feels comfortable and natural because it promises belonging and security in exchange for conformity to average ways of being human. The they-self manifests through the everyday language people use to avoid taking responsibility for their own opinions and choices. Consider how often you hear phrases like "everyone knows," "people say," "it is obvious that," or "nobody does that anymore." These expressions allow individuals to present particular viewpoints as universal truths rather than personal perspectives that could be questioned or challenged. By appealing to what everyone thinks or does, people can advocate for specific positions while avoiding the anxiety and responsibility that comes with owning their beliefs and choices as expressions of their own values and reasoning. This pattern extends throughout social life, creating what Heidegger called idle talk that circulates opinions and judgments without genuine understanding or personal engagement. Social media provides a contemporary example of how idle talk operates on a massive scale. People share, comment on, and react to information without necessarily understanding its deeper implications or taking responsibility for how their participation shapes public discourse. The constant flow of opinions, reactions, and trending topics creates an illusion of engagement while actually discouraging the slow, careful thinking required for authentic understanding and independent judgment. The they-self also operates through what appears to be helpful social guidance about normal life trajectories and appropriate goals. Cultural narratives about success, relationships, career development, and personal fulfillment provide ready-made scripts that eliminate the anxiety of having to create your own path. Go to school, get a job, find a partner, buy a house, have children, save for retirement. These conventional milestones offer structure and social approval while potentially preventing examination of whether these goals reflect your authentic values and desires. Consider how the they-self influences career choices through social expectations about prestigious, practical, or appropriate work. Young people often feel pressure to pursue careers that will impress others, provide financial security, or meet family expectations without carefully examining what kind of work would allow for authentic expression of their emerging values and capabilities. The they-self makes these external considerations feel like rational, obvious factors to consider, while discouraging deeper questions about meaning, personal growth, and authentic contribution. Consumer culture provides particularly sophisticated mechanisms for the they-self to operate through lifestyle choices and identity expression. Marketing strategies explicitly appeal to desires for belonging, status, and self-expression while channeling these desires toward predetermined products and experiences. People can feel they are expressing their individuality through consumption choices that actually represent conformity to market-driven categories and manufactured desires. The they-self makes this consumption feel like authentic self-expression rather than participation in standardized market transactions. The they-self affects how people understand and express emotions through socially acceptable patterns that may not reflect their actual inner experience. Cultural norms about appropriate emotional responses to various situations can prevent individuals from honestly examining and expressing their genuine feelings. Someone experiencing grief might feel pressured to move on according to social timelines, while someone experiencing joy might feel obligated to appear modest or worried about appearing too happy. These social expectations can interfere with authentic emotional processing and expression. Political engagement often falls under the influence of the they-self through partisan identification that substitutes group loyalty for independent thinking about complex issues. People might adopt entire packages of political beliefs based on party affiliation or social group membership rather than examining individual issues according to their own values and reasoning. The they-self makes this ideological conformity feel like principled political commitment, while actually preventing the difficult work of developing authentic political perspectives. Educational systems can inadvertently support the they-self by emphasizing correct answers over independent inquiry and conformity over creative thinking. Students learn to provide responses that teachers expect, rather than developing their own capacity for questioning, analysis, and original thought. This pattern can persist into professional life, where success often depends on meeting expectations rather than contributing authentic insights or challenging conventional approaches. The they-self makes this conformity appear rational and necessary, while discouraging the intellectual risk-taking required for genuine learning and innovation. Religious and spiritual communities can become vehicles for the they-self when they emphasize conformity to doctrine, ritual, or community expectations over personal spiritual development and authentic relationship with ultimate questions. People might participate in religious activities and adopt religious beliefs primarily for social belonging rather than genuine spiritual exploration. The they-self makes this social participation feel like authentic religious commitment, while potentially preventing deeper engagement with spiritual questions and experiences. The they-self creates what Heidegger called averageness, a levelling down of human possibilities to the lowest common denominator that everyone can easily achieve. Instead of inspiring people to develop their unique capabilities and perspectives, social pressure often encourages mediocrity that threatens no one and requires no exceptional effort or courage. Excellence, creativity, and authentic individuality can make others uncomfortable because they challenge the comfortable assumptions of average existence. The they-self, therefore, actively discourages the very qualities that authentic existence requires. This averageness appears in how people discuss complex topics by reducing them to simple opinions or emotional reactions rather than engaging in careful analysis that might challenge comfortable assumptions. Political discourse, moral reasoning, and even personal relationships often operate at superficial levels that avoid the difficulty and uncertainty involved in genuine understanding. The they-self makes this intellectual shallowness feel adequate, while discouraging the mental effort required for deeper engagement with complex realities. Overcoming the influence of the they-self requires developing what Heidegger called resoluteness, the capacity to take responsibility for your own existence rather than losing yourself in social conformity. This involves regularly examining your beliefs, choices and behaviors to determine whether they reflect your authentic values and reasoning, or simply represent unthinking conformity to social expectations. Resoluteness requires tolerance for the anxiety that comes from thinking independently and making choices that might not receive social approval or understanding. The process of distinguishing authentic choice from they-self conformity can be challenging because social influences often feel natural and reasonable rather than coercive. The key involves developing sensitivity to moments when you find yourself saying or doing things primarily because that is what people do, rather than because you have genuinely examined and chosen these actions. This requires honest self-examination about your motivations and willingness to acknowledge when social pressure influences your choices more than authentic reflection. Authentic existence does not require rejecting all social influence or conventional choices, but rather making these choices consciously after genuine consideration of alternatives. You might choose conventional paths like marriage, career advancement, or community involvement, but as authentic expressions of your values rather than unconscious conformity to social expectations. The difference lies in the quality of consciousness and choice involved rather than in the external appearance of your decisions. Authentic living can look quite conventional from the outside, while involving very different internal processes of reflection, choice, and commitment. Understanding the they-self ultimately provides tools for recognizing and resisting one of the most pervasive obstacles to authentic existence. By developing awareness of how social conformity operates through seemingly innocent mechanisms like popular opinion, normal expectations, and average behaviors, you can begin to reclaim responsibility for your own thinking and choosing. This awareness creates space for the anxiety and uncertainty that authentic existence requires, while reducing the unconscious drift toward comfortable mediocrity that prevents genuine self-creation and meaningful engagement with life's possibilities. Part 12. Facticity and Transcendence in Self-Creation. Human existence unfolds in the dynamic tension between facticity and transcendence, two fundamental aspects of consciousness that create both the constraints and possibilities of authentic self-creation. Facticity represents everything about your situation that is given, fixed, or unchangeable, the facts of your existence that you must work with rather than trying to eliminate or deny. Transcendence represents your capacity to go beyond these given facts through consciousness, imagination, and choice. Your ability to envision alternatives and act to transform your situation in accordance with freely chosen values and goals. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that authentic existence requires maintaining awareness of both elements while refusing to collapse into either pure acceptance of facticity or naive belief in unlimited transcendence. Facticity includes not only your thrown conditions like historical context, family background, and physical characteristics, but also the accumulated consequences of your past choices that now constrain your present possibilities. If you dropped out of school, developed addictive behaviors, or damaged important relationships through past decisions, these consequences become part of your current factical situation that shapes the options available to you now. You cannot simply decide that these past choices never happened or that their effects no longer matter. They become part of the factical reality within which you must exercise your ongoing freedom to choose how to respond and who to become next. Consider how this dynamic operates in something as concrete as career development. Your educational background, work experience, professional reputation, and financial obligations represent factical elements that influence what career moves are realistic for you at any given moment. You cannot simply transcend these factors through wishful thinking or positive attitude. However, you retain significant transcendent capacity to reinterpret these factical elements, develop new skills, build different relationships, and gradually transform your professional possibilities through sustained effort over time. The interplay between accepting factical constraints and exercising transcendent possibilities determines what becomes possible in your career development. Physical health provides another clear example of the facticity-transcendence dynamic. If you develop a chronic illness or physical limitation, this becomes a factical element of your situation that cannot be eliminated through mental attitude alone. Denying the reality of physical limitations represents bad faith that prevents effective adaptation and response. Yet within the constraints created by physical limitations, significant transcendent possibilities often remain available through adaptive strategies, attitude shifts, new goal formulations, and creative approaches to living fully within altered circumstances. The economic dimension of existence reveals how facticity and transcendence interact in complex ways that require both realistic assessment and creative response. Your current financial situation, including debts, assets, income level, and economic opportunities, represents factical reality that constrains your immediate choices about where to live, what work to pursue, and how to spend your time. Yet, these economic facts do not completely determine your future possibilities if you exercise transcendent capacities for learning, planning, relationship building, and strategic choice-making over time. Relationships illustrate the facticity-transcendence dynamic in particularly complex ways because they involve interaction between multiple free beings, each with their own factical situations and transcendent capacities. The history of a relationship, including conflicts, betrayals, shared experiences and established patterns, creates factical elements that influence current interactions and future possibilities. You cannot simply decide that past hurts or relationship patterns no longer matter. However, both people retain transcendent capacity to choose new responses, develop better communication skills, and gradually transform the relationship through sustained effort and mutual commitment to growth. Parenting reveals how facticity and transcendence operate across generational time frames. The parenting you received as a child becomes part of your factical situation that influences your own parenting approaches, emotional patterns, and relationship capabilities. You cannot eliminate the effects of your childhood experiences through conscious decision alone. Yet you retain significant transcendent capacity to examine these inherited patterns, develop new skills, and choose different approaches with your own children based on conscious reflection about what kind of parent you want to become. The dynamic between facticity and transcendence also affects how you understand personal growth and therapeutic change. Traditional therapeutic approaches sometimes emphasize either accepting your limitations or overcoming your problems, but existential approaches focus on the creative interplay between working within real constraints and exercising genuine possibilities for change. Effective therapy helps people distinguish between factical elements that must be accepted and areas where transcendent change remains possible. This prevents both passive resignation and unrealistic expectations, while supporting authentic engagement with growth opportunities. Educational development provides examples of how facticity and transcendence interact over extended time periods. Your past educational experiences, including gaps in knowledge, learning difficulties, and missed opportunities, create factical constraints on your current intellectual capabilities and academic options. You cannot simply decide to eliminate these educational limitations through attitude change alone. However, learning capacity itself represents a transcendent possibility that allows for significant knowledge development and skill acquisition throughout life, even within the constraints created by past educational limitations. Creative expression illustrates how facticity and transcendence can work together productively rather than simply limiting each other. Your current skill level, available resources, and cultural background represent factical constraints that influence what creative projects you can realistically attempt. Yet creative work often emerges from the tension between these limitations and transcendent vision that imagines new possibilities within or beyond current constraints. Great art often results from finding creative solutions to factical limitations rather than from unlimited freedom to create without any constraints. The workplace reveals how facticity and transcendence interact in ongoing professional development and career satisfaction. Your current job requirements, organizational culture, and professional relationships create factical realities that you must navigate rather than simply dismissing or ignoring. Yet within these constraints, significant transcendent possibilities often exist for skill development, relationship improvement, creative contribution, and gradual career transformation. The key involves realistic assessment of what can and cannot be changed while maintaining engagement with genuine possibilities for positive development. Understanding the facticity-transcendence dynamic helps explain why authentic existence requires both courage and realism, both acceptance and active engagement with possibilities for change. Pure facticity without transcendence leads to passive resignation that denies human freedom and capacity for self-creation. Pure transcendence without facticity leads to unrealistic expectations that ignore real constraints and often result in frustration and failure. Authentic existence involves the ongoing creative challenge of working with factical realities to exercise transcendent possibilities in ways that honor both elements. This understanding transforms how you approach both personal development and social change by providing a framework that is simultaneously realistic and hopeful. Individual growth involves honest assessment of your factical situation, combined with creative engagement, with transcendent possibilities for change within and beyond current constraints. Social progress involves similar dynamics at collective levels, working within current political, economic and cultural realities while exercising transcendent capacities for envisioning and creating better social arrangements. The facticity-transcendence dynamic ultimately provides a foundation for understanding human dignity that avoids both deterministic pessimism and naive optimism. Humans possess genuine capacity for self-creation and meaningful choice, but this capacity operates within real constraints that must be acknowledged and worked with rather than denied or overcome through mental effort alone. This creates the complex, ongoing challenge of authentic existence, constantly balancing acceptance of what cannot be changed with creative engagement with what remains possible. Part 13. The Ethics of Ambiguity and Moral Responsibility. Existentialism faces the profound challenge of developing ethical frameworks that honor human freedom while avoiding both moral relativism and authoritarian moral systems. Simone de Beauvoir addressed this challenge through her concept of the ethics of ambiguity, which recognizes that moral choice must occur within fundamental uncertainty about ultimate values, while maintaining genuine commitment to human flourishing and dignity. This approach acknowledges that ethical decisions cannot be resolved through appeal to absolute principles or cosmic authorities, yet it refuses to conclude that all moral choices are therefore equivalent or arbitrary. Instead, it locates moral responsibility in the quality of consciousness and choice involved in ethical decision-making, emphasizing the importance of authentic engagement with moral complexity rather than adherence to predetermined moral rules. The ambiguity at the heart of existential ethics stems from several sources that cannot be eliminated through better reasoning or more complete information. First, moral situations often involve conflicts between legitimate values that cannot be perfectly reconciled, requiring choices that necessarily sacrifice some goods in service of others. Second, The consequences of moral choices cannot be fully predicted, making it impossible to guarantee that well-intentioned actions will produce beneficial outcomes. Third, moral principles themselves emerge from human choice and commitment rather than from discovery of objective moral truths, creating uncertainty about which principles deserve priority in specific situations. Finally, moral agents themselves are finite beings with limited perspective and understanding, making perfect moral judgment impossible even with the best intentions. Consider how this ambiguity appears in concrete moral dilemmas like end-of-life medical decisions. Family members facing choices about life support for a loved one must balance values like respect for autonomy, preservation of life, prevention of suffering, and wise use of medical resources without clear guidance about which value should take priority. The medical facts may be clear, but their moral significance depends on value judgments that cannot be resolved through technical expertise or logical deduction. Different people with equally good intentions and moral sensitivity might reach different conclusions based on their understanding of what constitutes a life worth living, their assessment of the patient's likely preferences, and their beliefs about the relative importance of various moral considerations. Professional ethics reveals similar ambiguities in workplace situations where multiple legitimate concerns compete for priority. An employee who discovers organizational misconduct faces competing obligations to employer loyalty, professional integrity, public safety, and personal financial security that cannot be perfectly reconciled. Ethical frameworks may provide general guidance, but they cannot eliminate the uncertainty and personal responsibility involved in deciding which values to prioritize in specific circumstances. The employee must choose while accepting responsibility for both the intended and unintended consequences of their decision. De Beauvoir argued that this moral ambiguity, rather than undermining ethics, actually provides the foundation for authentic moral responsibility. When people recognize that moral choices emerge from their own values and commitments rather than from external authorities, they must take fuller responsibility for the ethical quality of their decisions and their consequences. This responsibility cannot be delegated to moral experts, religious authorities, or philosophical systems because these external sources cannot eliminate the fundamental uncertainty that characterizes human moral choice. The ethics of ambiguity emphasizes the importance of what de Beauvoir called authentic moral choice over adherence to specific moral conclusions. Authentic moral choice involves honest recognition of the competing values and potential consequences involved in ethical decisions, genuine commitment to human flourishing and freedom, and willingness to take responsibility for the choices made within conditions of uncertainty. This approach values the quality of moral reasoning and commitment over the correctness of specific moral conclusions, recognizing that equally authentic moral agents might reach different decisions in similar circumstances. This framework transforms how you understand moral disagreement and conflict. Rather than assuming that moral disagreements reflect ignorance, selfishness, or moral failure, the ethics of ambiguity recognizes that thoughtful, well-intentioned people may reach different moral conclusions based on different value priorities, life experiences, and assessments of likely consequences. This does not mean that all moral positions are equally valid, but it does suggest that moral dialogue should focus on understanding different perspectives and improving the quality of moral reasoning rather than simply winning arguments or imposing particular conclusions. Parenting provides clear examples of how the ethics of ambiguity operates in ongoing relationships where moral decisions affect others' development and well-being. Parents must make countless decisions about discipline, education, freedom and support that will influence their children's character development and life possibilities. No perfect parenting manual exists, and different approaches that reflect equally loving intentions may produce very different outcomes depending on the specific child, family circumstances and cultural context. Parents must choose while accepting responsibility for their decisions without the comfort of knowing that they are following objectively correct parenting principles. Political engagement reveals how the ethics of ambiguity applies to collective moral choice and social responsibility. Political decisions affect millions of people in ways that cannot be fully predicted, and they often require choosing between competing values like freedom and security, equality and efficiency, or national interests and global responsibilities. Citizens and leaders must make political choices within conditions of uncertainty, while accepting responsibility for their participation in collective decisions that affect others' lives and opportunities. The ethics of ambiguity also addresses the relationship between individual moral choice and systemic social problems. While individuals cannot single-handedly solve problems like poverty, discrimination, or environmental degradation, each person retains moral responsibility for how they respond to these collective challenges within their own sphere of influence. This responsibility cannot be precisely defined through moral rules, but requires ongoing reflection about how to contribute constructively to human flourishing while accepting the limitations of individual action. The ambiguity lies in determining how much responsibility individuals bear for collective problems and what forms of response are both realistic and morally adequate. Consumer choices illustrate how moral ambiguity appears in seemingly simple daily decisions that have complex ethical implications. Purchasing decisions involve considerations of environmental impact, labor practices, corporate behavior, personal needs and financial constraints that cannot be perfectly balanced through simple moral calculations. Consumers must choose while accepting that perfect moral purity is impossible in complex economic systems. Yet this impossibility does not eliminate moral responsibility for making choices that reflect authentic values and concern for others' well-being. The workplace presents ongoing ethical challenges that exemplify the ambiguous nature of moral choice in organizational contexts. Employees must balance competing obligations to employers, colleagues, customers and broader society while pursuing their own legitimate needs for income, professional development and job satisfaction. These competing obligations cannot be perfectly reconciled through abstract ethical principles, requiring ongoing moral reflection and choice-making that accepts responsibility for imperfect decisions within complex organizational realities. Understanding the ethics of ambiguity ultimately provides a framework for moral responsibility that is both humble and demanding. It is humble because it recognizes the limitations of human moral knowledge and the impossibility of perfect moral choice. It is demanding because it places full responsibility for moral choice on individuals and communities, rather than allowing them to hide behind external moral authorities or claim that moral uncertainty eliminates moral responsibility. This approach requires developing tolerance for moral uncertainty, while maintaining commitment to authentic engagement with ethical challenges and responsibility for the consequences of moral choices. The practical implications of this ethical framework emphasize the importance of ongoing moral reflection, dialogue with others who hold different perspectives, and willingness to revise moral judgments based on new experience and understanding. Rather than seeking final answers to moral questions, The ethics of ambiguity supports developing better capabilities for moral reasoning, greater sensitivity to the effects of choices on others' well-being and freedom, and increased commitment to taking responsibility for moral decisions within conditions of uncertainty. This creates a dynamic, evolving approach to ethics that honors both human freedom and the genuine moral challenges that freedom creates. Part 14. Existential Psychoanalysis and the Question of Desire. Jean-Paul Sartre developed what he called existential psychoanalysis as an alternative to traditional Freudian approaches that reduce human behavior to unconscious drives and childhood experiences. While acknowledging that past experiences influence current patterns, existential psychoanalysis focuses on the fundamental projects and choices through which individuals create their identity and pursue their deepest desires. This approach seeks to understand not what causes people to behave in particular ways, but what they are trying to achieve through their choices and how their actions reflect their attempts to create meaning and identity. Rather than treating symptoms as expressions of unconscious conflicts to be resolved, existential psychoanalysis examines how patterns of behavior reflect ongoing attempts at self-creation that may need to be understood and redirected rather than simply cured. The concept of fundamental projects lies at the heart of this approach. Sartre argued that each person organizes their life around certain basic projects that give coherence and direction to their choices across different life domains. These projects are not usually conscious or explicitly formulated, but they can be discerned through careful analysis of patterns in behavior, relationships, career choices, and responses to challenges. A fundamental project might involve trying to be needed by others, seeking perfection in all endeavours, avoiding vulnerability through control, or pursuing recognition and admiration. These projects shape countless specific choices while remaining largely invisible to the person pursuing them. Consider how a fundamental project might appear in something as specific as romantic relationships. Someone whose deep project involves avoiding abandonment might consistently choose partners who are emotionally unavailable, creating relationships that provide the familiar experience of trying to win love from someone who cannot fully give it. Traditional psychoanalysis might trace this pattern to childhood attachment experiences with inconsistent caregivers. Existential psychoanalysis would focus more on understanding what the person is trying to achieve through these relationship choices and how this pattern reflects their attempt to create a particular kind of identity and experience of self in the world. The workplace provides another arena where fundamental projects reveal themselves through career choices, work habits, and professional relationships. Someone whose basic project involves demonstrating their worth through achievement might choose high-pressure careers, work excessive hours, and struggle with delegation because these behaviors serve their deeper project of proving their value. Rather than simply treating workaholism as a behavioral problem to be corrected, existential psychoanalysis would explore what kind of self this person is trying to create through overwork, and what alternative approaches might serve their legitimate needs for meaning and self-worth. Existential psychoanalysis also examines how people use their relationships with objects, activities, and experiences to pursue their fundamental projects. Sartre wrote extensively about how individuals project meaning onto the external world through their choices about what to acquire, pursue, or avoid. Someone who collects vintage cars might be pursuing a project of connecting with a romanticized past, demonstrating technical knowledge, or creating a sense of permanence and control in an uncertain world. The specific objects matter less than the underlying project they serve, and the kind of self the person is trying to create through their relationship with these objects. The approach treats anxiety, depression, and other emotional difficulties not as mental illnesses to be eliminated, but as information about conflicts between different aspects of the person's fundamental projects or between their projects and reality constraints. Someone experiencing persistent anxiety might be pursuing contradictory projects, such as seeking both complete security and exciting new experiences, creating internal conflict that manifests as anxious feelings. Rather than medicating the anxiety, existential psychoanalysis would help the person understand these conflicting projects and make conscious choices about which directions to pursue. This framework also addresses how people use symptoms and difficulties to serve their fundamental projects in ways that may not be immediately obvious. Someone who frequently becomes ill might unconsciously use their health problems to receive care and attention that serves a deeper project of being needed and cared for. Rather than simply treating the physical symptoms, therapy might explore what legitimate needs the illness serves and how these needs might be met through more direct and sustainable approaches. The goal is not to eliminate all symptoms, but to help people pursue their authentic desires in ways that enhance rather than limit their possibilities. Existential psychoanalysis takes a different approach to childhood experiences and family dynamics than traditional therapeutic approaches. While acknowledging that early experiences influence development, it focuses more on how people continue to choose patterns that recreate familiar dynamics rather than being passively determined by their past. Someone who grew up in a chaotic household might continue creating chaos in their adult life not because they are compelled to repeat the past, but because chaos feels familiar and serves current projects like avoiding the anxiety of stillness or maintaining excitement and stimulation. The therapeutic relationship in existential psychoanalysis becomes a laboratory for examining how the person's fundamental projects appear in their interactions with the therapist. Rather than interpreting transference as a repetition of past relationships, the therapist pays attention to what the client is trying to achieve through their behavior in therapy. Someone who consistently arrives late might be testing boundaries, asserting control, or avoiding the vulnerability of full engagement. These patterns provide information about the client's ongoing projects rather than just evidence of past trauma or unconscious conflicts. The concept of bad faith plays an important role in existential psychoanalysis as a way of understanding how people avoid taking responsibility for their choices and the consequences of their fundamental projects. Rather than directly acknowledging their projects and desires, people often engage in self-deception that allows them to pursue their goals while denying responsibility for the outcomes. Someone who creates drama in relationships might claim they hate conflict while unconsciously seeking the intensity and engagement that conflict provides. Change in existential psychoanalysis involves helping people become conscious of their fundamental projects and make explicit choices about whether these projects serve their authentic desires and values. This process requires examining not just what people want to eliminate from their lives, but what they are trying to create and achieve through their current patterns. Sometimes the projects themselves need to change, and sometimes people need to find more effective ways of pursuing legitimate projects that serve their authentic development. The emphasis is on expanding consciousness and choice, rather than eliminating symptoms or correcting deficits. The approach also addresses how fundamental projects can conflict with each other or with realistic possibilities, creating internal tension and external difficulties. Someone might simultaneously pursue projects of complete independence and deep intimacy, creating relationship patterns that sabotage both goals. Therapy involves helping people recognize these conflicts and make conscious choices about priorities and realistic approaches to pursuing multiple legitimate desires. Existential psychoanalysis ultimately treats human beings as active creators of their experience rather than passive victims of unconscious forces or past experiences. This places greater responsibility on individuals for their patterns and choices, while also recognizing their capacity for conscious change and authentic self-creation. The goal is not adjustment to social norms or elimination of all difficulties, but rather authentic engagement with the ongoing project of creating a meaningful life within the constraints and possibilities of the human condition. This approach transforms how you understand your own patterns of behavior, emotional reactions, and life choices by encouraging examination of the underlying projects and desires they serve. Rather than simply trying to eliminate problems, you can explore what you are trying to achieve through your current approaches, and whether these strategies effectively serve your authentic goals and values. This creates possibilities for more conscious and effective pursuit of your deepest desires, while taking responsibility for the consequences and trade-offs involved in your fundamental life projects. Part 15. Existentialist Politics and Social Responsibility. Existentialism's emphasis on individual freedom and responsibility creates complex questions about political engagement and social change. If each person is fundamentally free to create their own essence and meaning, what obligations do individuals have toward collective problems and social justice? How can a philosophy that emphasizes personal authenticity address systemic issues like economic inequality, discrimination, and political oppression that affect millions of people? Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus each grappled with these questions in different ways, developing approaches to political engagement that maintain existentialist principles while recognizing the social dimensions of human existence and the collective responsibility for creating conditions that support everyone's capacity for authentic living. Sartre argued that individual freedom is inherently connected to collective freedom because authentic self-creation requires social conditions that support rather than undermine everyone's capacity for meaningful choice. If economic inequality prevents people from pursuing education, artistic expression, or meaningful work, then their freedom to create themselves remains severely limited regardless of their psychological capacity for authentic choice. Similarly, discrimination based on race, gender, sexuality, or other characteristics restricts people's possibilities and forces them to spend enormous energy responding to social barriers rather than pursuing their authentic development. From this perspective, working for social justice becomes not a distraction from individual authenticity, but a necessary condition for creating a world where authentic living becomes possible for everyone rather than just the privileged few. This connection between individual and collective freedom requires what Sartre called committed literature and engaged political action that addresses social conditions affecting human possibilities. Writers, artists, intellectuals and other cultural workers have particular responsibility to use their platforms and capabilities to expose injustice, challenge oppressive systems, and inspire people to work for social change. This does not mean that all art must be explicitly political, but it does suggest that cultural work cannot remain neutral in situations where social conditions prevent people from exercising their fundamental human capacities. The workplace provides clear examples of how individual authenticity connects to collective concerns about economic justice and worker rights. An employee who faces unsafe working conditions, inadequate compensation or discrimination cannot achieve authentic self-creation simply through individual attitude changes or personal development work. These systemic problems require collective action to address the structural conditions that limit workers' freedom and dignity. Yet this collective action must emerge from individuals who choose to take responsibility for creating better conditions rather than simply accepting exploitation as inevitable or natural. Existentialist politics emphasizes the importance of analyzing how social systems and institutions either support or undermine human freedom and dignity. Economic systems that concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a few while leaving others struggling for basic necessities create conditions that make authentic living difficult or impossible for large numbers of people. Political systems that exclude people from meaningful participation in decisions affecting their lives violate the fundamental human capacity for self-determination and shared governance. Educational systems that emphasize conformity and standardized thinking rather than critical inquiry and creative development fail to support the intellectual freedom necessary for authentic existence. However, existentialist political engagement must avoid the trap of reducing individuals to mere products of social forces, or treating political change as a technical problem that can be solved through better policies or systems alone. Social change requires individuals who choose to take responsibility for collective problems and who maintain their commitment to authentic living even while working within imperfect social movements and political organizations. This creates ongoing tension between the need for collective action and the importance of individual authenticity and critical thinking. Revolutionary politics presents particular challenges for existentialist engagement because revolutionary movements often demand conformity to ideological positions and strategic approaches that may conflict with individual critical judgment. Sartre struggled throughout his life with balancing his support for socialist and anti-colonial movements with his commitment to intellectual honesty and individual freedom. He ultimately concluded that supporting oppressed people's liberation efforts was more important than maintaining ideological purity, even when this meant accepting some contradictions between his philosophical principles and his political commitments. De Beauvoir's analysis of women's oppression provides a model for how existentialist principles can illuminate specific forms of social injustice while maintaining focus on individual agency and responsibility. She argued that women's subordination results partly from social systems that limit their opportunities and partly from women's own choices to accept subordinate roles rather than claiming their full human freedom. This analysis avoids both blaming women for their oppression and treating them as passive victims with no capacity for resistance and change. It emphasizes the importance of both changing discriminatory social structures and supporting women's development of confidence and skills for exercising their authentic capabilities. Environmental issues present contemporary challenges for existentialist political thinking because climate change and ecological destruction affect everyone while requiring collective action that transcends individual choice and national boundaries. Individual lifestyle changes, while important for maintaining personal integrity, cannot address problems that result from global economic and political systems organized around unsustainable consumption and production patterns. Yet, effective environmental action requires millions of individuals who choose to prioritize long-term ecological health over short-term convenience and consumption patterns that serve immediate desires. The question of violence in political action creates particular dilemmas for existentialist political engagement. While existentialists generally oppose violence as a violation of human dignity and freedom, they also recognize that oppressive systems sometimes use violence to maintain power, and that oppressed people may have limited options for creating change through purely peaceful means. Camus advocated for non-violent resistance whenever possible, while acknowledging the moral complexity of situations where peaceful change seems impossible and continued oppression causes ongoing suffering and death. Democratic participation presents ongoing challenges for maintaining authentic political engagement within systems that often reduce complex issues to simple choices between predetermined alternatives. Voting, political advocacy and civic participation require working within existing institutional frameworks that may not adequately represent the full range of political possibilities or the complexity of social problems. Yet existentialist political engagement emphasizes the importance of participating in available democratic processes while maintaining critical perspective on their limitations and working to expand possibilities for meaningful political participation. Consumer choices and lifestyle politics raise questions about the relationship between individual action and collective change. Choosing to buy organic food, drive less, or support particular businesses can express authentic values while contributing to broader social changes through market mechanisms. However, focusing exclusively on individual consumer choices can distract from the need for systemic changes in economic and political structures that shape the options available to consumers and workers. Existentialist political engagement requires balancing attention to individual choices with recognition of the need for collective action to address structural problems. International relations and global justice present challenges for existentialist political thinking because they involve complex interactions between different societies with different cultural values and political systems. Supporting human rights and democracy in other countries can easily become justification for cultural imperialism or military intervention that violates other people's right to self-determination. Yet ignoring oppression and injustice in other parts of the world can represent a form of privileged indifference that abandons global solidarity and shared human responsibility. Understanding existentialist politics ultimately requires recognizing that authentic individual living cannot be separated from collective responsibility for creating social conditions that support everyone's capacity for meaningful choice and self-creation. This creates ongoing challenges for balancing individual authenticity with collective action, critical thinking with political commitment, and idealistic vision with practical engagement with imperfect political realities. The goal is not to resolve these tensions completely, but to maintain creative engagement with both individual and collective dimensions of human existence, while taking responsibility for contributing to social conditions that enhance rather than diminish human freedom and dignity. Part 16. Projects and the architecture of self-creation. Human existence unfolds through what Jean-Paul Sartre called projects, the ongoing attempts to create meaning, identity and value through sustained engagement with particular goals, relationships and activities. These projects differ fundamentally from simple desires or temporary goals, because they represent comprehensive ways of being in the world that organize countless specific choices around underlying visions of who you want to become. A project might involve becoming a healer, creating beauty, building community, pursuing knowledge, or expressing creativity. But it operates as more than a career choice or hobby, because it shapes how you approach relationships, daily decisions, and responses to challenges across all life domains. Understanding the project structure of human existence reveals how authentic self-creation occurs through sustained commitment to meaningful directions rather than through isolated choices or abstract self-reflection. Projects emerge from the intersection of your thrown conditions, your emerging values, and your vision of possibilities worth pursuing. Someone who grows up in a community affected by environmental destruction might develop a project of ecological restoration that combines their direct experience of environmental problems with their emerging values about human responsibility to the natural world. This project would then influence countless specific choices about career, lifestyle, relationships, and political engagement, creating coherence and direction that transcends any particular job or activity. The project provides a framework for making decisions and evaluating opportunities based on their contribution to the larger vision of who this person is becoming through their environmental work. Consider how projects operate in something as concrete as career development over time. Rather than simply pursuing advancement, income, or status, someone engaged in authentic career development might organize their professional choices around a project of contributing to human well-being through their particular skills and interests. This project would influence decisions about which jobs to accept, what skills to develop, how to relate to colleagues, and how to balance work with other life commitments. The project creates continuity and meaning that persists even when specific jobs end or career circumstances change, because the underlying commitment to contribution and development continues across different professional contexts. Projects also provide structure for understanding how relationships contribute to self-creation rather than simply meeting emotional needs or social expectations. Someone whose fundamental project involves creating authentic intimacy and mutual growth might approach romantic relationships, friendships, and family connections as opportunities to develop deeper capacity for understanding, support, and shared meaning-making. This project would influence how they handle conflict, make relationship decisions, and balance individual autonomy with commitment to others. The relationships become vehicles for the larger project of developing authentic connection rather than just sources of pleasure, security, or social belonging. Creative projects illustrate particularly clearly how sustained engagement with meaningful directions can create identity and value over time. An artist committed to exploring particular themes, techniques, or social concerns through their work engages in a project that extends far beyond creating individual pieces or achieving recognition. The creative project involves developing vision, skill, and authentic expression while contributing to cultural conversations and human understanding through artistic work. Each specific creative work contributes to the larger project while the project itself evolves and deepens through ongoing creative engagement. Educational projects demonstrate how learning and intellectual development can serve larger purposes of self-creation rather than just skill acquisition or credential achievement. Someone committed to understanding complex social problems might pursue formal education, independent study, and practical experience as part of a larger project of developing knowledge and perspective that can contribute to positive social change. The educational project creates coherence across different learning experiences, while providing criteria for evaluating educational opportunities based on their contribution to authentic intellectual development. Parenting can represent a profound project of supporting another person's development, while simultaneously developing your own capacities for patience, wisdom, and unconditional love. Rather than simply fulfilling social expectations or meeting children's immediate needs, conscious parenting involves the ongoing project of creating family relationships that support everyone's authentic development and well-being. This project influences countless daily decisions about discipline, communication, boundaries, and family priorities, while evolving as children grow and family circumstances change. The parenting project creates meaning and identity that extends far beyond specific parenting techniques or achieving particular outcomes for children. Spiritual projects involve the ongoing attempt to develop deeper understanding of ultimate questions and authentic ways of relating to existence itself. Rather than simply following religious traditions or adopting spiritual beliefs, authentic spiritual projects involve sustained inquiry into questions of meaning, purpose, mortality, and connection that shape how you approach all aspects of life. These projects might involve formal religious participation, meditation practice, service to others, or creative expression, but they operate as comprehensive approaches to living rather than compartmentalized spiritual activities. Community projects demonstrate how individual self-creation can align with collective goals of creating better social conditions and relationships. Someone committed to building more just and sustainable communities might engage in various forms of activism, mutual aid, cultural work, and relationship building as expressions of a larger project of contributing to positive social change. This project would influence personal choices about consumption, work, relationships, and political engagement, while connecting individual authenticity to collective responsibility and shared human flourishing. Projects can also become inauthentic when they serve primarily to avoid existential anxiety rather than express genuine values and aspirations. Someone might pursue achievement, accumulation, or recognition not because these goals reflect their authentic desires, but because success provides temporary relief from confronting deeper questions about meaning and mortality. These inauthentic projects often generate frustration and emptiness even when they achieve external success, because they do not serve the person's genuine development or contribute meaningfully to human flourishing. Distinguishing authentic from inauthentic projects requires honest examination of motivations and outcomes over time. The evolution of projects over the lifespan reveals how authentic self-creation involves both continuity and change as people encounter new circumstances, develop new capacities, and gain deeper understanding of their values and possibilities. A project that serves authentic development during one life stage may need to evolve or transform as circumstances change and new possibilities emerge. Someone whose early career project focused on establishing professional competence might later develop projects emphasizing mentorship, creative expression, or social contribution as their skills and perspective mature. Projects can also conflict with each other, creating internal tension and difficult choices about priorities and resource allocation. Someone committed to both artistic expression and family relationships might struggle to balance the time and energy required for creative work with the demands of parenting and partnership. These conflicts cannot usually be resolved through perfect balance, but require ongoing conscious choice about priorities and creative approaches to honoring multiple important commitments. The tension itself can become a source of growth and deeper understanding of authentic values and possibilities. Understanding the project structure of human existence ultimately provides a framework for creating coherence and meaning across the complexity of modern life. Rather than treating life as a series of disconnected experiences or competing demands, organizing choices around authentic projects creates continuity and direction that can withstand setbacks, transitions, and changing circumstances. Projects provide criteria for evaluating opportunities, relationships, and commitments based on their contribution to meaningful self-creation rather than just immediate pleasure, social approval, or external success. This approach transforms daily decisions into opportunities for authentic self-expression, while creating the sustained engagement necessary for developing genuine expertise, relationships, and contributions to human flourishing. The practice of identifying and committing to authentic projects requires ongoing reflection about what directions genuinely serve your development and contribute meaningfully to the world beyond your immediate self-interest. This involves examining whether your current activities and commitments reflect chosen projects or simply habitual patterns, social expectations, or avoidance of more challenging but authentic possibilities. Authentic projects emerge from the intersection of your deepest values, your developing capabilities, and your assessment of what the world needs from your particular contributions and perspective. Part 17. Existentialist Aesthetics and the Creation of Beauty. Art and aesthetic experience occupy a unique position in existentialist philosophy because they represent pure forms of human creation that demonstrate the possibility of bringing meaning and beauty into existence without external justification or predetermined purpose. Unlike moral actions that can be evaluated according to their effects on others' well-being, or practical activities that serve functional needs, artistic creation emerges from the fundamental human capacity to create meaning and value through free expression. Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus each explored how artistic creation and aesthetic experience provide models for authentic existence, while revealing the challenges and possibilities inherent in human creativity. From an existentialist perspective, art matters not because it serves external purposes like entertainment, education, or political persuasion, but because it demonstrates the human capacity to create meaning and beauty within the apparent meaninglessness of existence. Artistic creation illustrates the fundamental existentialist principle that existence precedes essence because works of art exist before their meaning becomes clear, often remaining ambiguous and open to multiple interpretations throughout their existence. A painter begins with blank canvas and gradually creates an image whose significance may not become apparent until the work is completed, or may continue evolving as different viewers encounter it over time. The painting exists as a physical object before its aesthetic or symbolic meaning becomes established, demonstrating how creation can occur without predetermined purpose or guaranteed significance. This process mirrors the broader human condition of existing before knowing what that existence means or what purpose it might serve. The freedom and responsibility involved in artistic creation provide a microcosm of existential authenticity because artists must make countless choices about form, content, technique, and expression without external authorities to determine correct approaches. Traditional artistic training and cultural conventions provide some guidance, but ultimately each work of art requires individual choices that reflect the artist's emerging vision and authentic expression. These choices carry responsibility because they shape not only the particular work, but the artist's developing identity and contribution to cultural conversation. Failed or unsuccessful artistic efforts cannot be blamed on external factors because the creative process depends fundamentally on the artist's own choices and commitment. Consider how this applies to something as specific as writing a novel. The writer begins with nothing more than language itself and must create characters, settings, conflicts and resolutions through thousands of individual choices about words, sentences, scenes and narrative structure. No formula or external authority can make these choices for the writer, who must draw on their own experience, imagination and aesthetic judgment to create something that did not exist before. The resulting novel represents a unique expression of the writer's consciousness and values, while also contributing to the broader human conversation about meaning, experience and possibility. Aesthetic experience, from the perspective of encountering rather than creating art, demonstrates the human capacity to discover meaning and value through conscious attention and interpretation. When you experience a piece of music, painting, or literature that moves or inspires you, you participate in a form of meaning creation that requires your active engagement rather than passive consumption. The aesthetic meaning emerges from the interaction between the work itself and your own consciousness, experience, and interpretive capabilities. Different people can experience the same artwork in completely different ways, each discovering meanings and values that reflect both the work's qualities and their own capacity for aesthetic response. This interactive quality of aesthetic experience reveals how meaning creation requires both freedom and commitment, both individual interpretation and engagement with something beyond immediate self-interest. You cannot force aesthetic experience to occur through willpower alone, yet it also requires active attention and openness rather than passive reception. The experience emerges from choosing to engage seriously with the work while remaining open to possibilities for meaning and beauty that you might not have anticipated or controlled. Existentialist aesthetics also addresses the relationship between artistic creation and social responsibility. Recognizing that art can serve political and moral purposes without losing its authenticity as creative expression. Sartre argued for committed literature that addresses social problems and injustices while maintaining artistic integrity and avoiding propaganda or simple moralizing. This requires artists to balance their responsibility as citizens and moral agents with their responsibility as creators to produce authentic artistic work rather than predetermined messages. The challenge involves using art to explore and illuminate social realities without reducing artistic expression to political utility or sacrificing aesthetic quality to social messaging. The question of artistic success and failure provides insight into how existentialist values apply to creative work. Traditional measures of artistic success like popularity, critical acclaim, or financial rewards may not reflect the authentic value of creative work from an existentialist perspective. More important criteria might include the artist's honesty and courage in exploring difficult themes, the work's contribution to expanding human understanding and possibility, and the degree to which the creative process serves the artist's authentic development rather than external expectations or commercial considerations. Popular culture and mass media present particular challenges for existentialist aesthetics because they operate within commercial systems that prioritize marketability and audience appeal over artistic authenticity or meaningful content. Yet, existentialist principles suggest that authentic creative work can emerge within any medium or context if artists maintain commitment to honest expression and meaningful exploration of human experience. The key lies in the artist's approach to their work, rather than in the specific medium, genre, or distribution system they employ. Television shows, popular music, and commercial films can serve authentic artistic purposes if they emerge from genuine creative vision rather than purely commercial calculation. The role of suffering and difficulty in artistic creation reflects broader existentialist themes about the relationship between authentic living and confronting life's challenges honestly. Much great art emerges from artists' engagement with personal struggles, social conflicts, or universal human experiences like love, loss, mortality, and the search for meaning. This does not mean that suffering automatically produces good art, but rather that honest artistic engagement with difficult experiences can transform personal struggles into expressions that contribute to broader human understanding and connection. Collaborative artistic work like theatre, film, or musical ensembles demonstrates how creative expression can honour both individual authenticity and collective responsibility. Each participant contributes their own creative choices and authentic expression while working within the constraints and possibilities created by collaboration with others. Successful collaboration requires balancing individual creative vision with responsiveness to others' contributions and commitment to the collective creative project. This mirrors the broader existentialist challenge of maintaining authenticity while engaging responsibly with others in shared human endeavours. The relationship between artistic creation and everyday life reveals how aesthetic principles can inform approaches to work, relationships, and personal development beyond formal artistic activities. Living authentically involves similar creative processes of making choices that express your values and vision while remaining open to new possibilities and learning from experience. Relationships can become forms of collaborative creation where people work together to build connection, understanding, and mutual support through ongoing choices about communication, commitment, and shared activities. Understanding existentialist aesthetics ultimately provides insight into the human capacity for creating meaning and beauty as a response to the fundamental conditions of existence. Art demonstrates that meaninglessness does not eliminate the possibility of meaningful expression, that freedom can produce valuable creation rather than just anxiety and confusion, and that individual authenticity can contribute to collective human flourishing through shared cultural expression. Whether through formal artistic work or through the aesthetic dimensions of daily life, creative expression represents a fundamental form of existential authenticity that transforms the apparent absurdity of existence into opportunities for beauty, meaning, and human connection. The practice of developing aesthetic sensitivity and creative capability, therefore, becomes not just a specialized interest for artists, but a fundamental aspect of authentic human development. This involves cultivating attention to beauty and meaning in everyday experiences, developing skills for creative expression in whatever medium appeals to you, and supporting others' creative development through appreciation, encouragement, and collaboration. These activities serve authentic existence by exercising the human capacities that most clearly distinguish conscious beings from the rest of the natural world, while contributing to the cultural resources that support everyone's search for meaning and beauty. Part 18. The Question of Suicide and the Value of Life. Albert Camus began his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, with the declaration that there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. This startling statement reflects the existentialist recognition that the question of whether life is worth living becomes unavoidable once you acknowledge that existence has no predetermined meaning or cosmic purpose. If the universe provides no inherent justification for human existence, if death eliminates all achievements and experiences, and if suffering and absurdity characterize much of human experience, then why continue living? Camus argued that honestly confronting this question and choosing life, despite its apparent meaninglessness, represents the fundamental act of existential courage and the foundation for authentic engagement with human possibilities. The question of suicide in existentialist philosophy differs from psychological or medical approaches that focus on mental illness, emotional distress, or social factors that increase suicide risk. While these factors certainly matter for understanding and preventing suicide in practical terms, existentialist analysis examines suicide as a philosophical response to the fundamental conditions of human existence rather than as a symptom of particular disorders or circumstances. This perspective suggests that everyone who honestly confronts the apparent meaninglessness and finitude of existence must decide whether life remains worth living without external justification or guarantee of ultimate significance. Camus identified several common responses to existential meaninglessness that he considered forms of philosophical suicide because they avoid confronting the real conditions of human existence. Religious faith that promises ultimate meaning and eternal significance provides one form of escape from existential anxiety. But Camus argued that such faith requires abandoning intellectual honesty and accepting beliefs that cannot be rationally justified. Similarly, ideological commitments that promise historical progress or ultimate justice can provide meaning and purpose, but often require ignoring contradictory evidence and surrendering individual critical judgment. These responses avoid the anxiety of meaninglessness, but at the cost of abandoning the rational inquiry and honest assessment that Camus considered essential to human dignity. Physical suicide represents the most direct response to existential meaninglessness, the decision that life without cosmic purpose or ultimate significance is simply not worth the effort and suffering it requires. Camus acknowledged the logical appeal of this response, while arguing that it represents surrender to absurdity rather than authentic engagement with the human condition. Suicide eliminates the problem of meaninglessness by eliminating the consciousness that experiences the problem, but it also eliminates the human capacity to create meaning and value through choice and commitment, despite the absence of cosmic justification. Instead of these forms of escape, Camus advocated for what he called revolt, the decision to continue living while fully acknowledging the absurd conditions of existence. This revolt does not involve trying to overcome or resolve the absurd, but rather accepting it as the permanent backdrop for human existence, while refusing to be defeated by it. The revolt includes maintaining human values like justice, beauty, and compassion, not because they reflect cosmic truth, but because they represent authentic human responses to existence that create meaning within meaninglessness. This approach requires ongoing courage because it offers no final resolution or external validation for the choice to continue living and creating meaning. The workplace provides examples of how these existential questions appear in daily life when people confront the apparent meaninglessness of much professional activity. Someone experiencing career burnout or disillusionment might question whether their work contributes anything of lasting value or whether their professional efforts matter in any ultimate sense. The existentialist response would not involve finding cosmic justification for their work, but rather choosing what kind of professional engagement reflects their authentic values and contributes to human flourishing within the limited context of their individual life and immediate community. Relationships also raise existential questions about value and meaning when people confront the temporary nature of all human connections and the inability to guarantee lasting love or understanding. The knowledge that all relationships will eventually end through death, change, or separation can make intimate connection feel futile or pointless from a cosmic perspective. Yet existentialist approaches emphasize the present value of authentic connection and mutual care, rather than seeking relationships that provide eternal significance or permanent security. The temporary nature of connection can make it more rather than less precious when approached with full awareness of its limitations. The question of having children presents particular challenges from an existentialist perspective because it involves bringing new consciousness into existence that will inevitably confront the same existential challenges and eventually face death. Some people question the ethics of creating new life when existence involves suffering, anxiety, and ultimate meaninglessness. Others find in parenting opportunities to contribute to human flourishing and to experience forms of love and care that justify existence despite its difficulties and uncertainties. The decision cannot be resolved through abstract reasoning, but requires individual choice based on personal values and assessment of what makes life worth living. Creative work often provides examples of how people create value and meaning despite recognition of their ultimate transience and limited impact. Artists, writers, musicians, and other creative workers frequently produce works that will be forgotten or ignored. Yet they continue creating because the process itself provides meaning, and the work contributes to human culture and understanding during the brief period of its existence. The temporary nature of creative achievement does not eliminate its present value for both creators and audiences who encounter meaningful artistic expression. Social and political engagement demonstrates how people can work for justice and human betterment while acknowledging that all social progress remains temporary and that future generations will face their own versions of social problems and injustices. The knowledge that no political victory is permanent and that utopian social arrangements remain impossible does not eliminate the value of working to reduce suffering and expand opportunities for authentic living within present circumstances. The revolt against absurdity includes refusing to accept preventable injustice and suffering, even while acknowledging the limitations of all human efforts at social improvement. Understanding the existentialist approach to suicide and the value of life ultimately provides a framework for choosing life based on present possibilities rather than ultimate justifications. This choice requires ongoing renewal because it cannot be made once and then forgotten, but must be reaffirmed through daily decisions about how to spend finite time and energy. The approach emphasizes the dignity that comes from choosing life despite its difficulties rather than because of external promises or guarantees. This creates what Camus called lucid indifference to ultimate questions combined with passionate engagement with immediate human concerns and possibilities. The practical implications of this perspective involve developing appreciation for present experiences, relationships, and creative possibilities without demanding that they provide ultimate meaning or permanent significance. This can reduce both the despair that comes from expecting too much from life and the cynicism that results from concluding that nothing matters if it does not last forever. The goal is not happiness in any conventional sense, but rather what Camus called the struggle itself, of creating meaning and value through human choice and commitment within the constraints of mortal existence. This approach to the question of suicide and life's value transforms how you understand both success and failure, both joy and suffering, by placing them within the context of a life that is valuable because it is consciously chosen and authentically lived, rather than because it achieves particular outcomes or receives external validation. The measure of a life becomes not its duration, achievements or recognition, but the courage and authenticity with which it engages the fundamental challenges and possibilities of human existence. This creates space for finding value in ordinary experiences and relationships, while maintaining engagement with larger questions about meaning, justice and human possibility that can never be definitively answered but continue to motivate authentic living. Part 19. Living without hope, but not without meaning. One of the most challenging aspects of existentialism involves learning to live fully without the comfort of hope for ultimate resolution, perfect justice, or guaranteed meaning. This does not mean abandoning all future planning or positive expectations, but rather recognizing that authentic existence cannot depend on outcomes beyond your control or promises that may never be fulfilled. Albert Camus distinguished between hope, which he saw as a potentially dangerous illusion that prevents engagement with present realities, and meaning, which emerges from conscious commitment to values and actions that enhance human dignity and possibility within current circumstances. This perspective requires developing what might be called hopeless engagement, the capacity to work passionately for improvements and possibilities, while accepting that progress is neither guaranteed nor permanent, and that even the best human efforts may fail or be reversed by forces beyond individual control. Hope, in the sense that existentialists critique, involves expecting that life will eventually make sense, that justice will ultimately prevail, that good actions will be rewarded, and that human suffering serves some larger purpose. These expectations can provide psychological comfort and motivation for perseverance during difficult periods, but they can also prevent honest engagement with present realities and lead to devastating disappointment when life fails to meet these expectations. More problematically, hope can justify accepting current injustices or avoiding necessary action by assuming that external forces will eventually resolve problems that actually require human intervention and commitment. Consider how this applies to social and political engagement. Traditional approaches to social activism often rely on hope that history moves toward justice, that truth will eventually triumph over falsehood, and that current struggles will ultimately lead to better social conditions. While these beliefs can motivate sustained effort and sacrifice, they can also lead to disillusionment and withdrawal when progress proves slower than expected, or when gains are reversed through political backlash or economic crisis. An existentialist approach emphasizes working for justice because such work expresses authentic human values rather than because it will necessarily succeed or receive historical vindication. Environmental activism provides a contemporary example of how living without hope while maintaining meaning might operate in practice. The scale of climate change and ecological destruction can make individual and even collective efforts appear insufficient to prevent catastrophic environmental collapse. Hope-based approaches might focus on technological solutions, political agreements, or cultural shifts that could still prevent the worst outcomes. Hopeless but meaningful engagement might involve pursuing environmental protection and restoration because such work expresses authentic values about human responsibility to the natural world, regardless of whether these efforts can prevent large-scale ecological disaster. Personal relationships reveal another dimension of living without hope while maintaining meaning through ongoing commitment despite uncertainty about future outcomes. Romantic partnerships, friendships and family relationships all involve investing emotionally in connections that may not last and that cannot be guaranteed to provide lasting satisfaction or mutual fulfillment. Hope-based approaches to relationships often involve expectations about permanence, reciprocity, or emotional security that may not be realistic given the complexities of human psychology and changing life circumstances. Meaning-based approaches emphasize the present value of authentic connection and mutual care, while accepting that all relationships involve uncertainty, and that even the deepest connections may not endure. Career and professional development also illustrate the difference between hope-based and meaning-based approaches to life planning. Hope-based career strategies often involve expecting that hard work will be rewarded, that merit will be recognized, and that professional advancement will provide lasting satisfaction and security. While these expectations sometimes prove accurate, they can also lead to frustration and disillusionment when workplace politics, economic changes, or simple bad luck prevent expected outcomes. Meaning-based approaches emphasize choosing work that allows for authentic expression of skills and values while contributing meaningfully to human well-being, regardless of whether such work provides traditional measures of success or security. The question of legacy and lasting impact becomes particularly complex when approached without hope for permanent significance or historical remembrance. Many people derive motivation and meaning from believing that their contributions will outlast their individual lives and continue benefiting future generations. While some human achievements do persist across generations, most individual contributions are eventually forgotten, and even significant historical achievements can be reversed or undermined by later developments. Living without hope for lasting legacy means finding meaning in present contributions to human flourishing, rather than in expectations about future recognition or permanent impact. Parenting represents one of the most challenging areas for applying this approach because it inherently involves long-term investment in outcomes that cannot be controlled or guaranteed. Parents naturally hope that their children will be healthy, happy, successful, and able to create meaningful lives for themselves. Yet countless factors beyond parental control influence children's development, and even excellent parenting cannot guarantee particular outcomes or protect children from all difficulties and suffering. Meaning-based parenting emphasizes providing love, support, and resources that serve children's authentic development, while accepting that each child must eventually create their own approach to life's challenges and possibilities. Creative work often exemplifies living without hope while maintaining meaning, because artistic creation cannot be justified through guaranteed outcomes or external validation. Most creative work receives little attention or recognition, and even acclaimed artistic achievements may eventually be forgotten or superseded by later cultural developments. Yet artists continue creating because the process itself provides meaning through authentic expression of vision and perspective, regardless of whether the work achieves lasting significance or wide appreciation. The creative act becomes valuable for what it represents about human capacity for beauty and meaning-making, rather than for its ultimate cultural impact. Health and aging present ongoing opportunities for practicing hopeless engagement as physical capabilities inevitably decline. and medical interventions prove limited in preventing eventual death. Hope-based approaches to health often involve expecting that proper diet, exercise, and medical care will prevent serious illness and extend life indefinitely. While healthy habits certainly improve quality of life and may extend longevity, they cannot eliminate aging, illness, or death as fundamental facts of human existence. Meaning-based approaches emphasize caring for physical well-being as an expression of self-respect and responsibility, while accepting the limitations and uncertainties inherent in embodied existence. Educational pursuits demonstrate how learning and intellectual development can provide meaning without requiring hope for complete understanding or final answers to complex questions. Traditional approaches to education sometimes promise that sufficient learning will provide clear guidance for life decisions or comprehensive understanding of important subjects. In reality, deeper learning often reveals the complexity and uncertainty surrounding most important questions, making definitive answers more rather than less elusive. Yet learning remains meaningful because it develops human capacities for understanding, appreciation, and creative response to life's complexity, regardless of whether it provides the certainty or practical guidance that students might initially seek. Understanding how to live without hope while maintaining meaning ultimately provides a more sustainable foundation for engagement with life's challenges and possibilities. This approach reduces the disappointment and disillusionment that often result when hope-based expectations fail to materialize, while increasing appreciation for present experiences and opportunities that might be overlooked while waiting for future fulfillment. It also supports more authentic decision-making based on current values and circumstances rather than on expectations about future rewards or outcomes that may never occur. The practice of hopeless engagement requires developing tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity, while maintaining commitment to values and actions that enhance human dignity and possibility. This involves regularly examining whether your motivations rely on external validation or guaranteed outcomes, and shifting focus toward the intrinsic value of authentic choice and meaningful action. The goal is not cynical resignation, but rather a more mature form of engagement that finds value in the quality of choice and commitment rather than in the achievement of particular results or the fulfillment of optimistic expectations. Part 20. The Courage to Be and the Practice of Authentic Existence. The final challenge of existentialism involves translating philosophical insights about freedom, responsibility, and authenticity into sustained practices that support courageous living in the face of life's fundamental uncertainties and challenges. Paul Tillich's concept of the courage to be captures the ongoing effort required to maintain authentic existence despite the anxiety that comes from confronting meaninglessness, finitude, and the weight of absolute responsibility for your choices. This courage differs from heroic bravery in dramatic situations because it involves the daily practice of choosing authenticity over comfortable conformity, growth over stagnation, and engaged responsibility over passive drift through socially prescribed roles and expectations. Developing this courage requires specific practices and perspectives that support your capacity to live fully without external guarantees, while creating meaning through conscious choice and authentic commitment to values that enhance human dignity and possibility. The practice of authentic existence begins with developing what might be called existential awareness, the ongoing capacity to recognize moments when you face genuine choices about who to become, rather than simply reacting automatically to circumstances or following predetermined patterns. This awareness requires regular self-examination of your motivations, assumptions, and habitual responses to determine whether they reflect conscious choice or unconscious conformity to external expectations. Daily situations like responding to conflict, making career decisions, choosing how to spend leisure time, or relating to family members all provide opportunities to practice conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. The key lies in recognizing these moments as opportunities for authentic self-creation rather than treating them as routine occurrences that require no reflection or conscious decision-making. Developing tolerance for existential anxiety represents another crucial aspect of authentic living, because the recognition of freedom and responsibility inevitably produces discomfort that most people try to avoid through various forms of distraction or self-deception. Rather than trying to eliminate this anxiety through entertainment, consumption, busyness, or other forms of avoidance, authentic existence involves learning to experience anxiety as information about situations that require conscious choice and authentic engagement. This does not mean seeking anxiety or remaining constantly uncomfortable, but rather recognizing that some degree of existential discomfort accompanies honest engagement with life's fundamental challenges and possibilities. The practice of taking full responsibility for your choices and their consequences requires ongoing development of what might be called response ability, the capacity to respond thoughtfully and authentically to whatever circumstances you encounter. This involves distinguishing between what you can and cannot control, while taking complete ownership of your responses to both controllable and uncontrollable factors. When facing setbacks, disappointments, or unexpected challenges, the practice involves asking not, "Why did this happen to me?" but rather, "How do I choose to respond to this situation in ways that reflect my authentic values and support my continued growth and contribution?" Creating and maintaining authentic relationships requires developing skills for what might be called existential intimacy, the capacity to connect deeply with others while respecting their fundamental freedom and accepting the uncertainty inherent in all human relationships. This involves learning to love without possessing, to commit without controlling, and to support others' authentic development, even when it leads them in directions you might not choose or prefer. Authentic relationships require ongoing negotiation between individual authenticity and mutual care, between personal growth and commitment to shared values and goals. The practice involves regular communication about changing needs, evolving values, and the ongoing challenge of maintaining connection while supporting each person's individual development and self-creation. Engaging meaningfully with work and professional development requires approaching career not as the discovery of predetermined calling, but as an ongoing opportunity to express authentic values while contributing to human flourishing. This might involve choosing work that aligns with your emerging values and capabilities, finding ways to express authenticity within existing professional constraints, or gradually transitioning toward work that better serves your authentic development and social contribution. The practice requires balancing practical necessities like income and security with deeper questions about meaning, growth, and the kind of professional identity you want to create through your work choices. Developing a sustainable approach to social and political engagement requires finding ways to contribute to collective human flourishing while maintaining individual authenticity and avoiding both cynical withdrawal and naive idealism. This might involve supporting specific causes that align with your values, working to create better conditions within your immediate community, or using whatever platforms and capabilities you possess to contribute to important conversations and positive changes. The practice requires balancing individual responsibility with recognition of systemic constraints, maintaining hope for positive change while accepting that progress is neither guaranteed nor permanent. The goal is sustained engagement that expresses authentic values rather than activity motivated primarily by guilt, external pressure, or expectations about particular outcomes. Creative expression provides opportunities for practicing authentic self-creation, whether through formal artistic activities or through the creative dimensions of daily life like cooking, gardening, conversation, or problem-solving. The practice involves developing sensitivity to beauty and meaning in ordinary experiences while cultivating whatever creative capabilities appeal to you as expressions of authentic perspective and vision. This does not require exceptional artistic talent, but rather willingness to experiment with creative expression as a form of authentic communication and self-development. Managing the relationship with mortality and finitude requires developing what might be called mortal wisdom, the capacity to live fully while maintaining awareness that time is limited and that all achievements and relationships are temporary. This practice involves using awareness of mortality to clarify priorities and deepen appreciation for present experiences, rather than allowing death anxiety to create paralysis or desperate attempts to achieve permanence. The goal is living with appropriate urgency about what matters most, while maintaining perspective about the temporary nature of all human concerns and achievements. This creates space for both passionate engagement with life's possibilities and acceptance of its limitations and uncertainties. Developing intellectual courage requires maintaining commitment to honest inquiry and critical thinking even when such thinking challenges comfortable beliefs or popular opinions. This practice involves regularly examining your own assumptions and beliefs, seeking out perspectives that challenge your current understanding, and accepting the discomfort that comes from recognizing the complexity and uncertainty surrounding most important questions. Intellectual courage also involves communicating your authentic perspectives while remaining open to new information and different viewpoints that might modify or improve your understanding. The ongoing practice of authentic existence ultimately requires developing what might be called existential resilience, the capacity to maintain authentic engagement with life's challenges and possibilities despite setbacks, disappointments, and the ongoing uncertainty that characterizes human existence. This resilience emerges not from confidence about outcomes, but from commitment to the ongoing process of conscious choice and authentic self-creation, regardless of external circumstances or results. It involves finding meaning in the quality of choice and engagement, rather than in the achievement of particular goals or the fulfillment of specific expectations. The courage to be authentically yourself in a world that often rewards conformity and punishes independence requires ongoing support through relationships with others who share similar values, engagement with literature and ideas that inspire authentic living, and practices that maintain connection with your deepest values and aspirations. This might involve regular reflection through journaling or meditation, participation in communities that support authentic living, or professional relationships with therapists or counselors who understand existential approaches to personal development. The goal is creating conditions that support sustained, authentic engagement with life's challenges and possibilities, rather than expecting to maintain authenticity through willpower alone. Understanding existentialism ultimately provides not a final answer about how to live, but rather a framework for approaching life's ongoing challenges with greater consciousness, courage, and authenticity. The philosophy offers tools for recognizing and claiming your fundamental freedom while accepting full responsibility for how you choose to exercise that freedom within the constraints and possibilities of your particular situation. It supports the development of relationships, work, creative expression, and social engagement that honor both individual authenticity and collective human flourishing, while accepting the uncertainty and ambiguity that characterize all human endeavors. Most importantly, it provides perspectives that can transform the apparent meaninglessness of existence into opportunities for creating meaning through conscious choice, authentic commitment, and courageous engagement with the fundamental challenges and possibilities of being human in an uncertain but potentially beautiful world.